Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting adventure. Today, Audio Novel presents World Creator System by just_4_fun 1997. But, don't forget, supporting authors like just_4_fun 1997 is what keeps these amazing stories alive. Show some love for their incredible work. And if you read advanced chapter, join authors' Patreon or Discord group, link available in video's description, don't forget to check out. And if you're looking for more amazing stories, don't forget to check out my Patreon page. Your support helps turn incredible tales like this one into fully immersive audiobooks. Join me on this journey, and together, we can bring more stories to life. Thank you for being part of the adventure. Let's begin. Chapter 81, Chapter 72. As Merlin and Cassandra ventured away from Karth, they were away from city which was in chaos after THR explosion in Mnan's palace. While walking through the sand dunes, Cassandra was now wearing washerwomen's clothing with top piece being short, ruffled sleeves adding a touch of whimsy that enhanced her shoulders. The snug fit around her midsection highlighted her waistline perfectly, while the cropped length offered a tantalizing glimpse of her midriff. The deep V neckline plunged daringly, showing off just the right amount of cleavage, framed by loose ties that draped elegantly, adding an element of fluidity to her movements. As she turned slightly, the bottom piece of her outfit came into view. The long skirt was nothing short of breathtaking, with a high slit on one side that boldly displayed her leg up to the thigh, single panel of fabric down the middle, leaving her legs and hip bones completely exposed. She glanced at Merlin, her curiosity piqued. "So, can't you just magically take me to Lady Mohiam?" she inquired. Merlin sighed, his gaze steady. "First, we must find Balthazar's tribe. Lady Mohiam is with him," he explained. "From what I understand, Queen Isis's tribe was attacked. She and the surviving members are likely under his care. Balthazar is constantly on the move to evade Mnan's forces, so locating them will take some time." Unbeknownst to Cassandra, Merlin already knew Balthazar's location. He was waiting for all the remaining tribes to converge under Balthazar's leadership, ensuring that their combined forces could stand united against Mnan. Merlin summoned forth a portal with a sharp whistle. From within the swirling vortex emerged a magnificent sight, a sleek black horse with 8 powerful legs. This was Sleipnir, created by Eru himself for his avatar's exclusive use. With its 8 legs and supernatural speed, Sleipnir was unparalleled in swiftness, capable of reaching the speed of light. Loyalty flowed through its veins, bound to serve Merlin or any other avatar of Eru without question. Cassandra looked at 8-legged black horse in awe, while Sleipnir came to a stop at his master's side, and Merlin reached up and scratched the animal's neck. "Good girl," Merlin said. As Sleipnir pawed the ground eagerly, its obsidian coat gleaming in the sunlight, Merlin mounted effortlessly, a grin spreading across his face. With a nod to Cassandra, he beckoned her to join him, knowing that their journey would be swift and their destination. Merlin glanced back at Cassandra, his expression resolute. "Now, we have to get you back to your tribe." The sorceress nodded, understanding the urgency in his voice. The lovely woman stepped forward, the feminine shape of her playing wonderful tricks under the loose robes. With a gentle but firm grip on her hips, Merlin lifted her onto Sleipnir's broad back. The powerful steed shifted slightly, accommodating the added weight with ease. Merlin swung up into the saddle, behind Cassandra. The nomadic affair was large enough to accommodate them both, if snugly. With his grip firm on the reins. Night had fallen on Karth, and in the majestic throne room of Mnan, the warlord's 2 most trusted military advisors awaited his orders. That faithful servant, the scarred Thorak, stood by, waiting, hanging on his master's every word, every movement. That more recent addition to the inner circle, the patricidal Takmet, lounged at a table, sipping wine, as if disaster had not fallen. But it had. Troubled on his throne, the great teacher sat studying squirming arachnids. They are physically similar to scorpions, but can grow almost as large as a lobster. They possess 6 legs and a larger stinger tail, which curves up over the body and hangs over the head. They have a series of threatening-looking spines on each body segment, running up the sides of the body and tail. They are mostly green in color, with an iridescent sheen. Their most recognizable features are the designs on the plates of their bodies, particularly the marking on the final plate of their tails which resembles a human face. Because of this design they are also sometimes referred to as the Death's Head Manticore. Manticores are highly aggressive and extremely venomous scorpion-like insects from the continent of Essos. They were in a glass bowl on the wide stone armrest beside him. He withdrew from his belt the dagger and he sent it lancing down, spearing one of the wriggling arachnids. The deliberateness of that act now seemed at odds with his facial expression, as the warlord lifted the dagger with the writhing, dying scorpion impaled there, watching it with seemingly idle interest. "Take a dozen of your best men," Mnan said suddenly, and Thorak snapped to attention and Takmet looked up. "Track him down, kill him, and bring Cassandra back to me." Thorak nodded a curt bow. "Yes, my lord." Mnan drew the thin sharp blade down the abdomen of the scorpion, splitting it open to the tail, ending its struggle. "Send our fastest rider back to me, with word of his death," Mnan said. "And of her safety." Mnan reached into a quiver next to the throne and withdrew an arrow, the tip of which he poked into the venom sac of the dead scorpion. He twisted the arrow's tip, turned it, thoroughly soaking it in the poison. "My lord," Takmet said, rising finally, "rumors have spread to our armies that Cassandra has been taken." Mnan turned sharply to Thorak. "Is that true? Do such rumors fly?" The scarred commander glared at his fellow advisor, conveying his aggravation at Takmet stirring up trouble, then his gaze returned to his master, and he said, "Yes, my lord. Of course, our generals, and our officers in the field, will need to know of her abduction in order to rescue her. They will not rescue her, you will. And the men you ride with need not know, until the sorceress has been restored to our custody." "Yes, my lord." The warlord frowned in thought. "Silence these rumors. Kill those with traitorous tongues, at your discretion. The people must believe the prophetess is here, even if we can only sustain the deception a short while." Thorak nodded. "And when you see the wizard," Mnan added, "give him this for me." And the warlord handed his advisor the poison-tipped arrow, which Thorak handled judiciously, shielding the tip in a leather cover. Within the hour, Thorak and his personal cadre of his toughest, most trusted men, chosen from among the red-turbaned royal guards, galloped from the fortress city, into the night. Into the underworld, if necessary. And in his imperial chamber, the teacher of men stood ponderingly at a heavy stone tablet, displayed in a golden frame near his throne. This inscribed slab was ancient, even in these ancient times, and bore a crude form of symbols only the most learned scholars could decipher. It was made by Thr first sorceress of mystic tribe, Delphi. The warlord's fingers ran slowly across the symbols, his touch respectful, almost tender, his expression that of a man in a spell. His fingertips lingered on an etching of a man, who's raised a flaming sword in triumph. He was riding a horse with army behind him raiding what looked like a map of Essos. Then Memnon's fingers came to rest upon an etchings of burning sword, at the very bottom of the inscribed tablet. A very short time now, he thought, and all would be his. Starting with the woman, Cassandra, and ending with the world itself. Chapter 82, Chapter 73. At the crest of a rugged hilltop, 3 12-foot poles awaited them, warning signs for those who would enter the forbidden land ahead, the Valley of the Dead of legend. Each wooden shaft bore various human skulls intertwined with small animal bones, snakes mostly, and the dried skins of men who had dared pass this way. Merlin made sure to move slow to let Thorak catch up, since he wanted to remove Memnon trusted general from play. From the ridge they could see the unforgiving landscape that awaited them, pock-marked earth scattered with mud hills, stretching to a desolate horizon. Beyond that, a devastating desert awaited. He stood alongside the beautiful hostage stride the camel. He reached up and brushed her long hair away from the side of her face, and she looked sharply at him, startled, offended. "What are you doing?" she said, and caught his wrist. Firmly, but not roughly, he freed his hand, and he brushed her hair away, again, and slipped the golden hoop earring from her lobe. Confused, she frowned at him, and grabbed for her belonging, unsuccessfully. Now the Merlin moved forward, to the nearest of the fetish poles, and reached up and deftly hooked the hook over the top of the shaft. She snapped. "What in the name of the gods are you doing?" "Nothing, in the name of the gods." Merlin gave her the slightest smile. "Just marking the way for your so-called lord and master. He will be sending his men here, probably Thorak to retrieve you, so we guide him correctly to where we want him to be." She reared back, almond eyes narrowed, chin crinkled in contempt. "Memnon is not my master." "Perhaps not in your view," he said, as he slung himself up behind her, onto the generous nomadic saddle, "but Memnon sees you as his possession." And Merlin jogged Sleipnir into motion, heading down into the desolate valley. Rough as the ride was, it was not as blistering, literally, as the desert they soon found themselves in, where the sand blazed under the sun, and the skeletons of those who had tried to come this way before them had left their remains as grotesque sun-bleached markers. Thorak and his band of a dozen good men were several hours behind the little party. A forward tracker reached the ridge of fetish poles by sunset, and he snatched the sorceress's golden hoop from the skull atop one pole, and rode back to the line of red-turbaned men to deliver it to his commander. The scar on Thorak's face stood out whitely in his flushed face, as rage crawled through him like an invader, the warrior well aware the wizard was baiting him, taunting him. Normally they would have made camp now, but Thorak pushed his troops onward. They would ride until the sun was a memory. In the cool night blueness of the desert dunes, under a sky glittering with more jewels than any warlord could secure, the Merlin watched as the women sat there looking at the fire. "I was 11, she said, when Mnan heard the stories of my people. He then heard about a child, the girl, with eyes like the gods. He found my village and lined up 4 of his soldiers before me. He said, 'Tell me the names of these men. Each wrong answer means that man's death.' His own men," Merlin whispered. He was not surprised seeing these in the world of Game of Thrones. "His own men," she said, with a nod. I was terrified, but what could I do? I told him the names, all 4. Merlin sighed. He knew these things come bite you back in the world of Game of Thrones, and asked, "You shouldn't have done that?" Cassandra agreed and replied, "Yes. And, afterward, those same 4 soldiers killed my family, as I was taken away." Yet, for all her visions, for all her prophecies, Cassandra was unaware that she now loved the wizard. That her future was bound with his. By mid-morning the next day, Thorak and those dozen red-turbaned warriors had all but caught up with their quarry, as they trudged up the slope of a large dune, a wind shifting the sands ominously, sun beating down without mercy. They were not aware of their seeming imminent success. Their prey, however, was aware of them. From a nearby dune, Merlin, astride Sleipnir, the sorceress sharing his saddle, riding behind him now, her arms wrapped around his midsection, her standoffishness a memory, picked up on sounds, carried by wind. His keen senses were more finely honed than those of humans, trudging along trying to ignore the blistering heat, while the woman seemed lost in her mystical musings. He wheeled Sleipnir around and saw a cloud of dust, distant, but not so distant as to pose no threat. Still, the Merlin only smiled. In fact, he grinned. "Thorak." Cassandra turned, saw the gathering cloud of dust, and shook her head, with the weary resignation of the put-upon. "So he found THR marker." Merlin shook his head. "The fool took the bait and is riding right into a storm." The sorceress was studying him with childlike curiosity. "A storm?" Merlin grinned down at his companion, then he lifted his eyes away from the dust cloud Thorak and his men were raising, toward the opposite horizon. And now Cassandra looked up, her attention drawn to the direction in which the wizard was gazing. The sorceress' eyes took in that horizon, where she saw a dark brown shimmering fine, like a living thing, moving inexorably toward them. "God save us," Cassandra said, eyes huge as she took in the ominous, gathering darkness, as if an impatient night had decided to rush in, hours early. Merlin, having already knew this, added, "It's a sandstorm." "And right on time," the wizard said. The sound was growing, a hollow, eerie roaring, like a hoarse scream. Merlin hopped down off, and helped the Cassandra down, and from Sleipnir. He then placed a hand on her shoulder as blue glow enveloped her. She was curious and questioned, "What was that?" Merlin explained, "It was small protection against the sandstorm, you will able to see through the storm." He then gestured towards a particular spot, "Walk towards that direction and you will find a cave to stay from the sandstorm." Merlin removed his sleeved back revealing the 10 rings. They are sturdy iron bands that are worn around the forearms. The rings appear to be made of a dark, dense metal that has a slightly rough, worn texture. Each ring is thick and heavy, with intricate carvings and symbols etched into their metallic surfaces, giving them an ancient and mystical look. The 10 rings kept 5 rings on each arm to evenly distribute his strength enhancement. He created way back. It was his favorite weapons along with Excalibur, King Arthur Legend of the Sword. With a sudden, commanding motion, Merlin swung himself onto Sleipnir, the mighty 8-legged horse. The beast's powerful muscles tensed beneath him, ready for the charge. Merlin's cloak billowed around him, snapping in the fierce wind as he grasped the reins. In a burst of energy, Sleipnir sprang forward, hooves thundering against the earth in a rhythm that echoed like a war drum. The engravings on 10 rings lit up with blue, purple dim light running through the veins of his arms. On a flat stretch of desert, the red-turbaned company of 30 had paused. When their leader held up a hand, he'd heard something, someone, fast approaching. Thorak knew it couldn't be the wizard. A man alone would not dare attack 30 from such a distance. He believed Merlin could only cast magic at specific distance like those of warlocks. So it must be a courier from one of the armies, sent by Mnan. A red-turbaned warrior pointed. There. And coming down over a slope was one man, on a black 8-legged horse, the wizard. Was he mad, charging them like a one-man army? He's attacking, alone, one warrior said to another. The sun has baked his brain, the other said, the tracker among them. He's been seized by desert madness. And from their midst came Thorak's booming voice, shoot him down, also 1,000 Duranis to the men who brings me his head. Thorak's men were loyal, that was unquestioned, but the smell of money sparked these warriors to seek new heights of valor. The archers in the group quickly knocked their arrows and fired at Merlin's direction. It was a rain of arrows. While the others had swords whipped from belts and the bare-chested, red-turbaned warriors spurred their horses and galloped toward the lunatic, soldiers bellowing war cries that would have chilled the blood of any normal man. As Merlin and Sleipnir thundered closer, a volley of arrows darkened the sky, arching towards them with deadly precision. Merlin, eyes ablaze with unyielding determination, positioned his arms downward. The 10 rings slid down to his wrists, extend into a glowing, segmented whip, crackling with energy. With a fluid motion, Merlin began to spin the rings around himself, their energy intertwining to form a luminous, spinning web. Faster and faster they whirled, until they became a blur of light. The blue energy expanded, forming a shimmering, transparent dome that enveloped Merlin and Sleipnir. Arrows struck the dome with sharp, metallic pings, only to be deflected in showers of sparks. The dome held strong, a radiant shield against the onslaught. Thorak's men watched in awe and dread as their arrows fell harmlessly to the ground, their momentum broken by the wizard's arcane defense. As he rode Sleipnir and arrived close enough to Thorak's group, he shot the rings towards the ground, the energy chain striking with immense force. The impact created a powerful shockwave, knocking nearby soldiers off their horses and sending them sprawling across the sandy field. Dust and debris flew in all directions as the ground shook with the force of Merlin's landing. Without a moment's hesitation, Merlin extended 5 of his rings, forming an energy chain that snaked through the air with lethal precision. It wrapped around the neck of one of Thorak's soldiers, tightening with a strangling grip. With a flick of his wrist, Merlin flung the soldier high into the air, the man's screams lost in the wind. The soldier crashed back to the ground with a thunderous impact, creating another shockwave that sent Thorak's men flying. The raw power of Merlin's magic was undeniable, and fear rippled through the ranks of Thorak's army. Seeing the devastation he had wrought, Merlin gathered all his rings, each one shimmering with potent energy. With a grand sweep of his arms, he directed them to form a single, longer chain, glowing with a fierce blue light. The chain crackled with magical energy, growing longer and more powerful with each passing moment. The rings extended into a glowing, segmented whip, crackling with energy. When Merlin swung it, the whip moved with fluid, snake-like motions, creating sweeping arcs of blue light. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the raw power emanating from the weapon. Merlin swung the colossal chain in a wide arc, its energy trailing through the air like a comet. As it struck Thorak's soldiers, the force of the impact was cataclysmic. Bodies were sent flying through the air, armor shattered and weapons scattered. The chain continued its path, carving a swath of destruction through Thorak's ranks, each strike accompanied by a resonant boom and a shockwave that rippled through the sandy desert. They were thrown back, tumbling like rag dolls. Thorak was getting overwhelmed too. His battle axe in hand, his frustration unbearable as around him the blood-curdling cries of his men, he yelled out, "Surround him." Just as he was about to join in, things got worse as the sandstorm arrived, the length of the horizon, a brown swirl of destruction, came up behind him, miles wide, as tall as Memnon's palace, a churning, burning wall of flying particles. Thorak watched in helpless shock as his warriors and Merlin disappeared into the storm, while Thorak's fabled Red Guard broke their own charge, their ranks scattering as the whirlwind hit full force, swallowing them, the world a harsh vortex of sand, biting the flesh, blinding the eyes, the wind knocking men onto the desert floor, and when they tried to stand, knocked them down again. Thorak, for all his courage no less a victim of the stinging sand, all but blinded now, spun around hearing screams of his men, he couldn't tell where, since his men were being sent flying with each strike. With a swift, decisive motion, Merlin shot his rings outwards once more. Each ring glowed with fierce blue energy as they tore through the air, leaving trails of blue light in their wake and homing in on the scattered soldiers. The impact was immediate and devastating. The rings struck with such force that armor shattered like glass, and men were thrown to the ground, lifeless before they even hit the desert sand. The few remaining warriors were no match for the wizard's relentless assault. Thorak narrowed his eyes, trying to peer through the stinging sands of the storm. The howling wind whipped around him, carrying with it the faint, desperate cries of his men, now abruptly silenced. Panic began to creep into his heart, but he shook it off, his hand tightening around the hilt of his massive double axe. He strained to see through the haze, but the next thing he felt was not the sting of sand, but the iron grip of a hand around his throat. His eyes widened in shock as he was lifted effortlessly off the ground. The world spun around him, the storm a blurred vortex, and he struggled to focus on the figure before him. Merlin's piercing gaze bore into Thorak's eyes, cold and unwavering. Thorak gasped, he knew his death was coming. So he took his last moments to withdraw the manticore potion arrow from its quiver, and using the arrow like a knife, he stabbed Merlin's shoulder. Merlin winced slightly, he could tell what kind of poison it was and was not worried and snapped Thorak's neck. Chapter 83, Chapter 74. Before long, the wind of sand had moved on, leaving the desert's tan skin to shift under a more gentle breeze, whose fingers drew meaningless pictures and patterns on the restless dunes. The field of battle lay still as the death the sands covered. It was as if no one had ever been here, that, minutes before, a furious clash had taken place at this site seemed an impossibility. Nearby, where the Akkadian had left his companions to wait for the outcome, the sands seemed similarly empty of life. Then fingers began to protrude from the dune's surface, like a corpse rising from its grave. A single eye blinked open, the rest of the face it belonged to covered by the sand. Cassandra walked through the field of death looking around for Merlin, by her side was Sleipnir. Then, alarm and concern coloring her voice, she asked, "Where is Merlin?" Sleipnir started leading her. The sorceress walked the battlefield, which on closer examination was not so empty. After all, half a dozen half-buried bodies presented themselves. She walked carefully, gingerly, through this instantaneous graveyard. Then, suddenly, the sand shifted before them. She saw Merlin, who was looking at half-buried figure. Warrior revealed himself, interred below him, wide-eyed in death, Thorak himself. For an ugly brute, Arpad said, he makes a pretty sight. Merlin had gone to the woman. Are you all right? Are you hurt? Did they? No, she said. I'm untouched. And the sorceress was struck by his concern, the depth of feeling in the dark eyes of the assassin. Cassandra was looking at Merlin carefully, he seemed unsteady. Are you? I am well, he said. Then she noticed the arrow, sticking out of the side of his leg, not terribly deep, but embedded there. You need help, she gasped. The wizard reached down and gripped the arrow and, frowning, ripped it free from his flesh. The wizard staggered over to the half-buried corpse of Thorak. An amulet around his adversary's neck bore the insignia of the Red Turban troops. Ripping it from Thorak's cold throat, he said, "Help me find his horse." "There it is," Cassandra said, pointing. Thorak's black steed, a distinctive beast, was among those milling around the battle site. The wizard walked to the horse and examined the area around the saddle. "Another survivor," he said, with satisfaction. As Cassandra joined him, they saw what he was talking about. A falcon, its head covered by a cowl, was thonged to the saddle. Merlin untied the bird and attached Thorak's insignia to the metal band around its foot. The sorceress touched the wizard's arm. "What are you doing?" "Sending Lord Mnan a message," he said, but his eyes seemed cloudy. Nonetheless, Merlin managed to remove the bird's cowl and launch the falcon into the air. It wheeled, flapped regally, and flew away. The wizard stood with his hands on hips, watching the bird wing toward Karth, and he laughed a deep, hearty laugh that turned, startlingly, into a cough. "Merlin!" Cassandra cried. "What's wrong?" she asked. Merlin frowned and replied, "Poison." Cassandra was worried, but Merlin cut her off. "I will heal up soon, I just need some sleep." Merlin felt he was too arrogant and led to him being poisoned, while he knew this was not life-threatening. But end of the day his avatar, while having godlike abilities, is still mortal in a sense, and some of the poisons still have some effects on him, while they may not kill him. But they will still cause him to be slightly weakened. Cassandra's heart raced with a mix of fear and guilt as she helped Merlin to his feet. The sorcerer, once invincible and proud, now leaned heavily on her for support. His usually vibrant eyes were clouded, and his movements were slow, the poison still working its insidious way through his system. "We need to get you to Sleipnir," Cassandra said, her voice trembling. "He'll carry us to safety." Sleipnir, the majestic eight-legged steed, stood waiting at the edge of the courtyard. The horse's eyes glowed with an ethereal light, and it stamped its hooves impatiently as if sensing the urgency of the situation. Cassandra guided Merlin to Sleipnir's side, struggling to hide her panic. "Hold on," she whispered, helping Merlin mount the horse. With some effort, she climbed up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist to keep him steady. Sleipnir reared up, sensing the need for haste, and with a powerful leap, they were off. As sunset painted the rocky landscape around the great city of Karth a vivid orange, as if the earth itself had caught fire, a falcon flew over the fortified walls and to its familiar perch within the turreted palace of Mnan. The marketplace was closing down, excluding the dens of sin, of course, and soon all but the most dedicated lechers would have retired behind walls of stone, for time with friends and family, for food and rest. Lord Mnan, however, did not rest. He had assembled his generals in the great throne room, where maps were spread out over a large table. Most pressing, of course, was Meron, the only unconquered land, and the warlord was sharing his latest strategies with his battle chiefs. As usual, his generals paid rapt attention, but one of them, Tauren, seemed strangely quiet, even preoccupied. And this troubled the great teacher, who preferred his pupils hang on his every word. Takmet, the heir to the empty throne of Merlin, was present, but he too seemed to have his mind elsewhere, and did not crowd around the map table with the rest. Of course, Mnan had already informed Takmet of these strategies. Even so, the man's nervous pacing was a distraction. And of this assembly, of course, only Takmet knew the why of Cassandra's absence, that the wizard had stolen her away. A falconer entered, with the regal, recently arrived bird on his arm. Approaching the warlord, then half-bowing, he said, "A message from Thorak." Finally, Mnan said, with a sigh of satisfaction, "The wizard is dead." But the warlord soon realized he was looking at Thorak's insignia, his blood-spattered insignia, and nothing else. Rage and even a kind of sadness rose in him. The scarred warrior had been at his right hand for many years, and now the wizard had slain him, and sent this taunting message. Crushing the bloody amulet in a powerful hand, Mnan stood lost in thought for long moments, before General Tauren stepped forward. "My lord," he said. "Is something wrong?" The warlord banished the emotions from himself, and glanced impassively at his generals. He even summoned a small smile. "No, quite the opposite. All is in order." The generals exchanged glances. "And I think, gentlemen," Mnan said, "this meeting is at an end." The generals half bowed and were making their way across the throne room, toward the doors, when Tauren stopped and turned, the other men halting as well, though their expressions were tentative. With a boldness none of them had ever before dared, General Tauren said, "My lord, it is customary for the seer to attend these meetings. We all know how valuable her counsel has been." Takmet paused in his pacing to look tellingly Memnon's way. "Why," the general was brazenly asking, "is the sorceress not with us tonight?" Around him, the other generals were nodding their heads. Mnan, hiding his anger at this affront, said only, "She is indisposed." The generals again exchanged anxious glances, and Tauren asked, the suspicion obvious in his voice, "Nothing serious, I hope?" Mnan smiled, though his eyes were hard. "If it was serious, you would be informed. Are you not my most trusted advisors of war?" General Tauren again half-bowed. "Yes, my lord." And the other generals did and said the same, and went out. With a growl of fury, Mnan swept the maps from his table and hurled the wadded-up leather insignia at Takmet, who flinched. The wispily bearded advisor said, "I said nothing. I revealed nothing." "Would that I could trade your worthless life for Thorak's," the warlord said bitterly. "Go. Leave me." And Takmet, who for all his faults was no fool, did as he was told. That night, in the surprising coolness of the sunless desert, under the purple star-tossed sky, the full moon touching the sands with a chalky ivory. Merlin conjured a fire, they laid down under a blanket, while lost in fever's labyrinthian halls, beads of perspiration jeweling his hoar 3-ad. Kneeling beside the wizard, the sorceress tended his wound, cleansing it with water from a goatskin pouch, bandaging it with cloth torn from the scarf-like Bedouin robes she wore. Merlin slept. Cassandra patted a damp rag to the wizard's forehead. Cassandra sat back, pausing in her ministering, as if considering the little thief's words, then she gazed up at the full moon, her lovely features bathed in its ivory glow. Cassandra moved with a silent grace, barely making a sound as she approached the sleeping Merlin. The moonlight cast a soft glow on his peaceful face, making him look almost serene despite the turmoil of recent events. She straddled him carefully, her movements deliberate and measured, ensuring she didn't wake him. Slowly, she removed her scarf, revealing her neck and shoulders, and then crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes fixed on Merlin's face. She leaned in close, so close that she could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. With a gentle but firm motion, she pried his mouth open. Instantly, a radiant glow began to emanate from Merlin's mouth, illuminating the room with an otherworldly light. The glow intensified, and from within Merlin's mouth, golden wisp of energy began to emerge and they moved into Cassandra's mouth. The moonlight now seemed to provide an aura around her, her entire body haloed in its glow. Suddenly the glowing aura disappeared, and the slender woman seemed almost to collapse, though really she only slumped, her shoulders slack, her head drooping, as she laid next to Merlin. It was as if all of the energy in her, every ounce of air, had suddenly vanished, like the snuffing out of a candle's flame. Chapter 84, Chapter 75. Merlin looked across the now dwindled campfire at the still slumbering Cassandra. She looked innocent, somehow, and if he had ever seen a lovelier creature, he couldn't recall it. Of course, he did have a blinding headache. She seemed to feel his eyes on her, and came awake, her eyes went directly to his, and their gazes locked. Her relief at his survival was evident, as a tiny, tender smile flickered across her lips. Merlin smiled and said, "You know, you didn't have to do that. But still thank you." She turned away, smiling to herself, happy for his gratitude, but not willing to let him know it. Then she looked at him, her face a beautiful blank mask, and said, "No thanks needed. It was self-preservation. If you had died, where would?" But an explosion interrupted her, a loud roar that seemed to rock the desert floor. The Cassandra looked up at the clear sky, confused. Thunder? Without clouds? Merlin. Merlin was noting a billowing of black smoke over a nearby dune. He sniffed the air and a familiar chemical scent tickled his nostrils. "That is not thunder, but I think I know who caused it." A tiny fellow came running out of the black cloud, like a figure fleeing a burning house, only Philos the scientist was not terrified, rather he was ecstatic. "It works. It finally works." Behind him was Saruman, who smiled at Merlin. A/N, originally I didn't want to bring Philos in again, but I remember Saruman in the movie was also the creator of gunpowder. So getting both of them here is good idea here. Running gleefully down the sandy slope, the soot-smudged little man saw the trio before him and his happiness only grew. As he ran up to them, he all but did a little dance. "Ah, I knew it," the scientist said. "I knew you were close, my lady, I felt it last night. And an invention of mine confirmed it, so I headed this way." Saruman walked up to them and spoke up. He wanted to complete his magic powder formula, so brought him here. Philos nodded in excitement, added, "This man is like me, a genius. He helped me perfect the formula." Saruman nodded, said, "He is a fellow scholar." Philos smiled, he got along well with Saruman. While Philos bowed, a low, respectful gesture, before Cassandra, saying, "My lady Oracle. And you, wizard, hello. You see. I have perfected the ET compound. My magic powder works." The two responded to this ball of enthusiastic energy with a stunned silence. "By the way," the scientist said casually, "would any of you happen to have any water? I'm utterly out." Merlin questioned, "So did you find our allies?" Saruman didn't say anything but just gave a nod and said, "Yes, I came across Balthazar and Queen Isis's people." Philos pointed in the direction and said, "Yes." And within an hour, they had reached an oasis so beautiful, so perfect, it should have been a mirage, but it was not, it was real, as the birds circling over its ring of palms confirmed. Just beyond the oasis, mountains rose steeply, and the desert seemed only part of the world, now, not its entirety. Along the rock-bottomed pool, crystal water shimmering under the sun, Cassandra knelt, cupping her hands with cool liquid. She glanced up at Merlin, standing beside her. She asked, "Do we dare drink? Or is it poisoned?" Merlin touched the water and said, "It's safe." She drank the water down, and the Akkadian crouched beside her and filled his goatskin pouch and several water bottles. "Where are they?" she asked. "They are here," he admitted. Men in leathers and animal skins, hard and fierce, rose from the holes they'd hidden in, tossing off rattan sand-colored mats, and aiming crossbows and slings at the little party. "Oh dear," said Philos, on his knees by the waterside. Merlin had seen their like before. He knew these markings, the bone and bead necklaces. Cassandra held tight to his arm as the bandits closed in on them. No escape possible, no fighting a crossbow aimed at the throat, not even if Mattheus had been in his full fighting form. Merlin spoke up, "I am Wizard Merlin and we are here to see Balthazar, Queen Isis and Lady Mohiam." Merlin, Cassandra, Saruman and Philos, that unlikely quartet of desert travelers, were ushered from the oasis to the mountain range that rose from the idyllic waterhole's edge. Here, massive rocks combined with the natural camouflage of hanging vines and the drapery of vegetation to shield a sizable entrance into a cavern. A caravan could spend the night at the oasis, and never suspect the nearness of the mountain lair of these bandits, that is, the caravan lucky enough not to fall prey to their hidden hosts. Their scruffy captors led the little party through a dark, dank passageway, lighted by torch, until, astonishingly, the cave opened into a natural open-air amphitheater, the late afternoon sun dappling an incredible temple-size area playing home to a staggering network of tents and walkways, a sheltered world of bare timber, rope, twine, and canvas, encompassed by greenery climbing, then succumbing to the cliffsides surrounding. Booty was stacked and stored here and there and everywhere, stolen, no doubt, from Memnon's caravans by Balthazar. Chapter 85, Chapter 76. Merlin and his group were led by armed guards to a central place, around which scores of dwellers clustered ever nearer. The crowd consisted of warrior bandits bearing shields and spears and wearing the war paint and leathers of numerous tribes, their women and children mixed in, swarming for a closer, openly suspicious look. Surprisingly, some of the faces, the females and the offspring particularly, were filled with fear, and no woman could compare with the exotic beauty of Cassandra. On the other hand, few were as puny as Philos. Nearby was the largest of the tents, a central canvas timber structure, the door flap of which drew back, revealing a figure all too familiar to Merlin, the Nubian giant, Balthazar, with whom the Merlin had met at the late King Ashur's tribal council. Balthazar remained the same formidable figure, ropey dreadlock braids on an otherwise bald skull, massive muscles carved from ebony, ritualistic decorative scars on a face dominated by slitted eyes and a broad flat nose, battle beads looped around a tree-trunk neck, shoulders so broad you had to look at them one at a time. For a moment the Nubian king froze, as dark anger rose through him like smoke through a burning building. Then the Mountain's upper lip curled in a sneer. "Wizard," he said, his voice deep, resonant. "It seems you succeeded." The giant sat heavily on a timber entwine throne. "And now we will take care of the sorceress." Balthazar hated magic users because of previous tribe members being sacrificed by a group of warlocks. He escaped through sheer luck. So he found deep hatred for Merlin and his kind, to such an end that it clouds his judgment. Cassandra glanced at Merlin, who replied, "Can't do that, I am told to hand her over to Lady Mohiam." Balthazar frowned. He wanted to kill the sorceress and end the chances of her ever landing in the hands of Memnon. Balthazar, leaning forward, a hand on one knee, "I have heard you even took out Memnon's right hand." Merlin did not reply. And Cassandra began to wonder if she would be in danger. "Call Lady Mohiam and Queen Isis, I wish to talk to them," Merlin said, "and I will do my best to explain." Bold words. The Nubian king shifted in his wooden throne. Brazen orders from one who trespasses. Philos spoke up, "We do not trespass, your people brought us here." Silence. Balthazar shook a thick finger at the wizard. "Our survival depends on keeping this location a secret. So you present a problem, wizard, as long as you're alive, at least." Saruman frowned. He was about to take action, but Merlin gestured him not to do anything. From a corner of his eye, Merlin noticed someone was pushing through the crowd. No, not someone, a group, perhaps half a dozen, knifing through the mob, parting them rudely. "Balthazar," a strong female voice cried. Queen Isis emerged, that dark regal beauty, underclad in leather armor, and around her were what remained of her woman warriors, fierce beauties whose numbers had dwindled since the UR tribal council. She stood proudly, hands on her hips, and by her side was Lady Mohiam, both of them gazing up at the looming Nubian king. You violate your own laws, if you slaughter these visitors. You know full well this is a place of sanctuary for the enemies of Mnan. Balthazar, trembling with a quiet rage, said nothing, but his gaze remained locked with hers. The winds have carried the stories, Isis said, of the wizard bravely stand against the men of Mnan. Now, I know that there are those among us, yourself included, Balthazar, who have no great love for my tribe. Some men fear strong women. Isis, Balthazar said, you try my good LOTR__, she went on, as if he had not spoken, her words more for those congregated, than for the king. I am not fond of the people of the western mountains. And she gestured toward a face-painted group among the crowd. Yet we accept them, as we accept all of those who come here, for shelter, in this time of Memnon's atrocities, whatever our personal feelings might be. Balthazar scowled, while Lady Mohaim teared up seeing Cassandra, who smiled back. Lady Mohaim walked up to Cassandra and hugged. Cassandra was happy to see her grandmother figure again. Balthazar shook his head. The wizard is different, he said. He is magic user, who knows what kind of dark rituals he done to delay his age. As such, he is dangerous. Saruman scowled and said, idiot, even fools with some sense know, even without magic now delaying aging is possible. Did you forget Melange? Saruman glared at Balthazar and added, also we do not use dark rituals, we follow Eru, not dark ones like LOTR. Balthazar was angry at being called a fool. But Isis was shaking her head, now. Your judgment on this matter is clouded. The Nubian king threw his head back and roared, it is my judgment that keeps all of you alive. And now Balthazar strode over to the prisoners, he planted himself before them and said, take the woman and the other two away. The Merlin stepped out in front of Cassandra and slammed his staff on the ground, causing small shockwave, causing some of warriors, who was about to carry on Balthazar's orders, to be thrown back. Merlin said, an ominous edge in his voice, fair warning, king, the first hand to touch her, I will cut that hand. Cassandra looked at Merlin anew, the caring, the passion, in his voice and eyes, were undeniable. Cassandra slowly understood, he really loves her. Chapter 86, Chapter 77. Balthazar withdrew his huge sword, grinning ruthlessly. I could hope for no finer invitation, wizard. It was Valyrian steel blade with bone-shaped handle is garnished with artificial rubies and gold plate. Merlin held his hand out as Excalibur appeared in his hand. The crowd instantly drew away, creating a larger arena, as the Nubian charged forward without fear toward Merlin. Merlin stood firm, gripping Excalibur in his hands as Balthazar approached. The fight was about to start, but for Merlin, time seemed to decelerate the moment his fingers wrapped around the leather-bound grip of Excalibur. The engraved characters at the base of the blade ignited with a brilliant blue hue, casting an eerie glow that matched the intensity of Merlin's eyes. Balthazar roared, charging forward with his massive scimitar poised to strike. His strength was legendary, but Merlin felt the calm of precognition settle over him, a gift from the enchanted sword. He anticipated Balthazar's every move before it happened, reading the battle as if it were a well-worn map. The first clash of their blades sent a shockwave through the air, rippling outwards and sending Balthazar staggering back. Balthazar's blade cracked slightly. Balthazar was shocked, but he continued the fight. Merlin swung Excalibur with a precision and force that belied his human limits. The fuller running down the blade caught the light, adding to the spectacle of each swing. Every strike created a visible shockwave, a testament to the sword's immense power. Balthazar staggered back, his eyes widened with surprise and shock again. He had never faced an opponent like this. With a swift motion, Merlin spun Excalibur in a tight arc. The blade's double edges gleamed as they cut through the air, the crossguard's angled arms almost seeming to guide the blade towards its target. With another powerful swing, Arthur sent a shockwave directly at Balthazar. The force lifted the warrior off his feet, slamming him into a food carts. Balthazar's sword started having more and more cracks. Merlin's movements were a blend of practiced grace and raw power. As Balthazar rose, bruised but not beaten, he hurled his scimitar in a desperate attempt to close the distance. Merlin saw it coming in the slowed perception granted by Excalibur and sidestepped with ease. He brought the sword down in a two-handed strike, the engravings and pommel glowing fiercely. The impact created another shockwave, more powerful than the last, which knocked Balthazar's weapon from his hand and forced him to his knees. You fought bravely, Merlin said, his voice steady and resonant. He held Excalibur high, its blue light illuminating the determination on his face. But this ends now. Pointed half-staff was poised at the Nubian's throat, dimpling the flesh. Around them, the bandit amphitheater had gone dead silent. Every man there, including, and especially, Balthazar, knew that in an instant, with a simple thrust, the king would be dead. But the wizard, while keeping that point pressed to the king's throat, chose instead to speak. "Why hate me? We are fighting for same cause." "Right," the defiant warrior said bitterly. "You have brought death to my people. As surely as night follows day, Mnan will follow you. I have killed those he has sent, their bones bleach in the desert sand." The Nubian's eyes and nostrils flared. "Mnan will send more troops. He will not stop, until he has, his sorceress." Though pinned to the wall, the big man managed to point toward the aghast Cassandra. "Though Mohaim told you to retrieve her alive, I was planning on killing her. Since every breath she takes means death to my people. You think just by killing her things would end?" Merlin's voice was a blend of frustration and concern. "Mnan has control over the melange deposits in the Red Waste. Can you guarantee that another seer won't come out?" Balthazar, still nursing his wounds, frowned. He understood the wizard's point. Memnon's reach was vast, and his influence even more so. The death of one seer might not be enough to thwart his plans entirely. Cassandra, her face etched with worry, added, "Mnan is looking for ways to attain another seer, since he believes my powers will leave me upon leaving my purity." "Will you stand alone before the fury of his armies?" the king asked, laughter replaced by a somber timbre. Without hesitation, Merlin gazed directly at Balthazar and said, "Yes." The refugee camp around him looked on in awed silence. Cassandra felt a chill. A voice within her said she had just witnessed the birth of a king. And even Balthazar seemed to regard the wizard in a new light. The Nubian king heaved a sigh, having been granted his life, now granting a small concession. "I want to hear your plans, wizard." Merlin nodded, and taking Balthazar's blade from the ground, he used magic to treat the cracks and threw it back to Balthazar, who gave small smile. And the king disappeared back within his tent, as the guards fell away, and Merlin and his party joined the rest of the assembled tribes. As bandits, these people had raided and stung Mnan, but now, among them, they knew. One braver than themselves had proclaimed himself ready to face the warlord and all his minions, alone if need be. Chapter 87, Chapter 78. When night's purple star-studded cloak fell across the open-air cliff-bound chamber, music echoed across the campfires, flutes and drums, percussive yet melodic, primitive yet civilized. An atmosphere of goodwill, or at least better will, accompanied nightfall, the enmity of the clash between their king and the wizard having muted into a truce, anyway, if not quite an alliance. The visitors had been provided a tent, and Cassandra was strolling toward it, enjoying the music, the camaraderie. She paused at a cooking fire where a congenial group had gathered, roasting 3 pigs on one long skewer. Philos had taken a student Arno, having made friends, and Arno currently was arm-wrestling one of Queen Isis's fierce yet beautiful woman warriors. The queen herself was looking on, rooting for her soldier, while the eccentric scientist sat cheering his fellow student on. The Sleipnir was nearby, grazing at a feed bag, not terribly interested. Philos was saying, "Leverage, my boy. Leverage. It's not just strength, it's science, too." And with that, Arno's fist was slammed to the tabletop by the laughing female. Philos shook his head and chuckled, as the thief flexed his sore hand, saying, "A gentleman always allows a lady to win." Then, to the lovely warrior, he asked optimistically, "Best 2 out of 3. Smiling at the little thief's antics, Cassandra strolled on. She was perhaps halfway to the tent when a child of 4 or 5 scampered up to her, and tugged at her sleeve. She looked down, where he was gazing up adoringly with big dark eyes, offering her dates from a bowl, and wondered if she had ever seen a more adorable child. She smiled and accepted the gift, then tousled the boy's hair. For a moment, she was not a lady oracle, just a woman, a young woman, thinking about marriage and children of her own, half Valyrian, perhaps. But as she touched the boy, her fingers in his scalp, a vision seized her. And was back in the camp, where the only fires were cooking food or providing warmth, and the only shrieks were of laughter. The little boy looked up at her strangely, afraid now. Her trance had spooked him, and he backed away. On quick but unsure feet, she found her way to the tent, perched by a campfire among some rocks, and went in and sat on the ground, looking up through the open flap at the moon, the almost full moon. Sometime later, Merlin entered and sensed her discomfort, asking, "Is something wrong?" She did not look at him, her eyes on the moon. "Mnan knows I'm here, or at least, he will, soon." She pointed to the sky. "It is the night of blood moon when what I saw in my vision will come to pass. You will have to make a movie soon, since Mnan will release his armies, and they will ride into the heart of this camp. And rip it out." Merlin knelt beside her. "Visions are not always right, they sway according to the choices one makes. So don't worry, I will take care of it." She turned her gaze upon him, admiring his bravery. "I will always believe you," and she lay her fingers gently against his cheek, closing her eyes and summons another vision, in which she saw Karth being attacked. Memnon's favorite palace was being rained down by rain of fire. Merlin was leading Balthazar, Queen Isis and their men against Mnan. The battle was raging. Merlin soon fought with Mnan, bringing him down. In the moonlight filtering through the tent flap, the wizard held the woman by her arms, but the sorceress hugged him, eyes squeezed shut, a single jewel of tear trickling down her smooth cheek. "What did you see?" the wizard with smiled questioned. Cassandra said, "You will join Balthazar and Queen Isis to attack Karth and bring down Memnon's reign." He spoke her name, and turned her to him, cupping her chin, lifting her face to his, her eyes tortured, her lashes pearled with tears. She was really happy to see such a vision. Merlin smiled and said, "Are you happy with such a vision?" Cassandra nodded. "Haven't you had enough of visions?" he asked her, that small smile still on his lips, something else, something fervent, in his tone. What do you mean?" The wizard swept her into his arms and kissed her, deeply, passionately, and she responded, clutching him desperately, returning his kisses with the same hunger. As they embraced, he lowered her to the sandy floor and, as firelight jumped and danced, as if in celebration, their souls, and much more, entwined. Cassandra rose up to her feet and started removing her clothes, which pulled on the sandy ground. Cassandra straddled Merlin's lap and he removed her upper clothes. Her breasts spilled out and Merlin grabbed the firm orbs before squeezing them. She grinded up against him. Cassandra hummed, as Merlin cupped her firm ass, which prompted a moan. Cassandra lined up her dripping cunt over Merlin's rod. She aimed herself towards his hard rod and pushed all the way down onto his rod. "Yes," Cassandra moaned. Merlin pushed into her and filled her completely up. "Oh yes." Cassandra rose almost all the way up onto Merlin's throbbing hard rod and then sank down. Her dripping box pushed up and down on Harry's veiny tool. Merlin squeezed her breasts and flicked his tongue against her nipples, really getting her hot and wild. Cassandra bounced up and down on Merlin's throbbing manhood. It filled her pussy far and deep, to the point where she had been stuffed forward. Merlin grabbed her hips and decided to thrust up to meet more of her. She never had her pussy filled so far and wide. Merlin smiled and could sense the pleasure going through the mind and body of the witch. He ran his fingers down her spine and she whimpered in pleasure. "Come for me," Harry said. He nibbled on her earlobe. Cassandra could not deny her lover any more. She took her cunner all the way down on Merlin's throbbing tool and pushed her lips against him. "Yes, yes, oh God," Cassandra moaned. Her wet vice clamped and released Merlin's rod. She came hard and Merlin only thrust into her even harder. His hands found every single inch of her body and tempted her. Cassandra reared herself back and dropped down herself cunt first down onto Merlin's rod. She rose almost all the way up and dropped down onto him again. She bounced high and fast, their thighs slapping together in a fevered motion of love-making. Merlin sucked on her nipples and really got her going. Finally both of them climaxed. As they lay in each other's arm, Cassandra watched this brave man as he slept, his slumber deep, for him to have battled Balthazar to fighting and being poisoned by Thorak. Soon Merlin woke up, he smiled at Cassandra, who sleeping beside him. Merlin called forth a meeting. Balthazar, Queen Isis, Lady Mohame and Cassandra all sat inside. All of them were in discussions about future battle. Balthazar frowned and questioned, "Tell me, wizard, why call forth a meeting now?" Merlin explains, "Cassandra saw two visions yesterday, one was Mnan finding this place and slaughtering everyone. My only guess is, your attack on Memnon's caravans didn't go unnoticed as you thought." This made Balthazar, Queen Isis and Lady Mohame worried, but Cassandra added, "My second vision was Merlin along with Balthazar, Queen Isis and their people attacking Karth. there was rain of fire brought down by Merlin on Memnon's palace. Finally, battle between Mnan and Merlin took place, bringing down Mnan. Balthazar, Queen Isis and Mohiam was shocked. They looked at Merlin, who said, "I did have thoughts of attacking Karth, since Mnan wouldn't be expecting an attack from us anytime soon." Queen Isis in slight excitement said, "We have chance, Balthazar, we must take this." Balthazar was not sure, he was wary. But Mohiam added, "Balthazar, we cannot always hide here. Just like Merlin said, your attacks on caravans has not gone unnoticed, and this is God-given chance against Mnan." Isis nodded and added, "Also, without the sorceress he will not have anyone to warn him." Balthazar agreed, narrowing his eyes at Wizard. "Okay, Wizard, I will believe you." Chapter 88, Notice. Chapter 89, Karth Fight 79. Outside the fortified walls of Karth, along the forward parapet of which 4 archers were positioned to shoot down intruders. And half a dozen red-turbaned, heavily armed guards walked around patrolling THR main gate. Merlin, cloaked and hooded, stands in the shadows just outside along with Balthazar, Queen Isis and. His eyes glint with determination as he reaches into his cloak and pulls out a sleek, metallic arrow, the Yaka arrow. Its shaft glows faintly with a reddish hue. Merlin softly said, "Let's see how well this works." The guards stand at attention, unaware of the danger approaching. Their armor gleams under the torchlight, and they grip their spears tightly. Merlin brings the arrow to his lips and begins to whistle, a haunting, melodic tune that carries on the night air. The arrow lights up, responding to Merlin's whistle. It levitates from his hand and hovers for a moment, shimmering with energy. With a sharp, high-pitched sound, the arrow shoots forward, slicing through the air with incredible speed. It leaves a faint trail of red light in its wake. The arrow strikes the first guard in the chest, piercing through his armor with ease. He collapses to the ground before he can cry out. Merlin's tune shifts slightly, and the arrow abruptly changes direction, darting towards the next target. The arrow weaves through the guards, striking each one with deadly precision. It loops around a guard's spear and drives into his throat. It hovers for a split second before accelerating and taking out 2 guards standing close together. One of the last guards turns, eyes wide in terror, as the arrow comes straight for him. He raises his shield, but the arrow effortlessly pierces through it and him. At Gate of Karth, guards lie scattered around the entrance, the only sound the faint echo of Merlin's whistling. The arrow hovers momentarily above the scene, then speeds back to Merlin. Merlin catches the arrow effortlessly, its glow fading as it returns to his cloak. He looks at the now unguarded gates and steps forward. Merlin gestured Balthazar, Isis and their small army, they all slowly made it inside. Memnon's palace stands tall and imposing against the night sky, a symbol of power and tyranny. Guards patrol the streets of Karth, their torches flickering in the wind. Balthazar, Isis and their men start taking out any patrol guards. That became an issue. But Queen Isis and her warrior women jumped down from the cart, and one of the red-turbaned guards, his attention already caught, strode over, calling, "You there? You wenches!" Isis turned and regarded him with a steely stare. The guard drew his sword as he approached. Resting the tip of the weapon to the queen's slender throat, the guard growled, "And what are you up to, you women?" "Remove your sword from my neck," the queen commanded. He frowned. "No female tells me what to do." She leaned forward, causing the point of the sword to dimple her own flesh, her eyes flashing as she said, "There's always a first time." Then she leaned away from the blade and, in a move as swift as it was graceful, a blur in the startled guard's eyes, Isis swung around her right leg and her foot caught the man's wrist, sending his sword flying end over end into the air. And when the weapon came down, the queen snatched it into her grasp, as easy as picking a grape off a bunch, the pommel making a nice fit in her hand. The guard barely had time for any of this to register, before Isis returned his sword to him, driving it deep into his chest. She regarded his startled expression, and the wide empty eyes, in the guard's face, then she said, "A first time, and a last," and pushed him to the ground. The other guards regarded this with amazement for a few moments, then belatedly drew their swords and rushed over, as the warrior women, lithe and graceful as any harem girl dancers, drew their own blades, dispatching the sentries quickly, all but silently. Blood tan and glistened in the moonlight. But one of them still alive sounded the alarm horn, thus the alarm bells echoed through the palace and beyond. The raiding party of Balthazar, Queen Isis and her warrior women, outside the walls, shrouded in night shadows, awaiting the explosion that would signal their attack, reacted with dismay. "Oh no, Queen Isis said. Damn, Balthazar breathed, as he saw a phalanx of the red-turbaned guards come running at them from around the corner of the palace, in full battle array, swords high. Merlin spoke up, "Don't worry, I will take care of it." Merlin stands in the center and his eyes focused on the palace. He raises his arms, and a magical glyph glows beneath his feet, illuminating the ground with fiery energy. Merlin chanting in ancient Valyria, "By the flames of the heavens, I call upon the fury of the skies." The glyph expands, fiery lines of magic extending outward. A deep rumble starts, the ground vibrating with the intensity of the. High above, massive meteors start to materialize, their molten cores radiating heat. Each meteor is a colossal, fiery rock, surrounded by roaring flames. They crackle and pulse with raw energy, leaving trails of smoke and fire as they begin their descent. The meteors plummet towards the palace with increasing speed. The air around them distorts from the intense heat, creating a shimmering effect. The first meteor hits the palace walls, creating a massive explosion. Fire and debris fly in all directions, and the shockwave ripples outwards, knocking down guards and shattering windows. Another meteor smashes into a tower, causing it to crumble and collapse. A series of meteors rain down on the palace courtyard, creating craters and engulfing the area in flames. One meteor strikes the main hall, obliterating the roof and sending burning wreckage into the sky. The palace is engulfed in flames and smoke. The meteors continue to fall, each impact creating more destruction. Buildings crumble, walls collapse, and the ground is scorched black. Merlin yelled, "I am going inside to get Mnan, the meteors won't hurt you," as lowers his arms, the glyph fading away. He watches as the palace is half consumed by the inferno, the flames reflecting in his eyes. This caused Memnon's army to fall into chaos while Merlin ran inside. Balthazar and Isis took this chance and rushed to battle. Queen Isis had seen the Nubian in full battle form before, but even she could only be impressed by his frightening skills. A massively muscled right arm raised and lowered and swung and carved that blade with swift, spectacular precision. Balthazar's strategy was impeccable, using one body to block and unhinge another opponent, until they were literally falling over themselves, the living onto the dead. And soon the elite red-turbaned guards lay scattered across the bottom of the palace steps like human refuse, while the Nubian king loomed above them like an unforgiving god. Balthazar gave a solemn nod to his fallen foes, saying, "We will meet again in the underworld," and then he strode, two at a time, up the steps of the palace, to the golden doors at the top landing. "Wait!" Isis called to him. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" Balthazar turned. At the crest of those steps he looked more like a great guard than the invader he was. "I am going inside, we must modify our battle plan." Eyes flaring, Isis asked, "In what way?" "I am going inside," the Nubian said, "and aid the wizard." The queen gestured to her warriors, the women here and there about the steps. "Shall we come, too?" Balthazar cut in, "No." Queen Isis looked at Balthazar, "You would do this alone?" "Yes. Just as the wizard said he would stand alone against Mnan and his armies." "But..." Balthazar cut in again, "Woman. Do I have a choice?" "Guard these doors." Queen Isis reluctantly agreed. While Balthazar ran after Merlin. Chapter 90, Chapter 80. Merlin and Balthazar burst into the inner courtyard, their eyes locking onto Takmet and his army of red-turbaned warriors. The courtyard, filled with tension and the smell of dust and sweat, seemed to shrink as the imminent battle loomed. Takmet, though a coward at heart, understood that Memnon's fall would strip away his life of luxury. In a desperate attempt to retain his power, he had gathered his men to quell the insurrection outside. Takmet's face contorted with rage as he spotted the duo. "Get those bastards, kill them," he roared, spittle flying from his mouth. The red-turbaned warriors, swords gleaming, charged towards Merlin and Balthazar with fierce determination. The sound of their battle cries echoed off the stone walls of the courtyard. Balthazar drew his sword, the blade reflecting the light of the setting sun. "There are too many of them," he muttered, gripping his weapon tightly. Merlin calmly rolled up his sleeves, revealing the 10 rings. The intricate engravings on the rings lit up with a mesmerizing blue and purple glow, the light coursing through the veins of his arms. "Don't worry," he said, a confident smile playing on his lips. "I'll thin out the group." With a flourish, Merlin extended his arms, and the rings transformed into a glowing, segmented whip, crackling with blue energy. He swung the whip with precision, the segments moving with fluid, snake-like motions. The whip created sweeping arcs of blue light as it sliced through the air. He swung the colossal chain in a wide arc. He threw 5 of the rings, which linked together by blue energy to form a spinning energy disk. The disk spun rapidly, radiating an intense blue glow that illuminated the courtyard. The linked rings shot forward, cutting through the ranks of the red-turbaned warriors with devastating force. The spinning disk hummed with power, and sparks of blue light flickered around its edges as it tore through armor and flesh. Bodies were sent flying through the air, armor shattered and weapons scattered. The chain continued its path, carving a swath of destruction through Takmet's ranks, each strike accompanied by a resonant boom and a shockwave that rippled through the ground of courtyard. They were thrown back, tumbling like rag dolls. Many of the soldiers fell lifeless, struck down by the relentless energy disk. Some lay injured, groaning in pain, while a few managed to leap out of its deadly path, among them Takmet himself. Scrambling to his feet, Takmet's eyes were wild with fear, but desperation fueled his determination. The surviving soldiers, though battered and bloodied, staggered to their feet. Fear was etched on their faces, but Takmet's roar of command cut through their terror. "Kill him. Do not allow him to rest," he bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. The first guard lunged at Merlin, sword gleaming in the sunlight. With a swift motion, Merlin raised his arm, the rings glowing brighter. As the sword struck, a pale gray energy pulse radiated from the rings, creating a shockwave that reverberated through the air. The guard's sword shattered upon impact, and the force of the shockwave sent him stumbling backward. With a flick of his wrist, Merlin directed the ring's power into his fist. He punched the nearest guard with such force that the man was lifted off his feet and hurled several meters away, crashing into a market stall. The crowd gasped, witnessing the sheer might of Merlin's enhanced strength. Another guard charged at Merlin from the side, but Merlin was ready. He grabbed the man by his tunic and, with a powerful heave, launched him across the street. The guard flew through the air like a rag doll, landing with a bone-crunching thud against the cobblestones. 2 more guards attacked simultaneously, their swords aimed at Merlin's chest. Merlin raised his arms, and the rings emitted another gray shockwave, blocking the strikes and sending the guards reeling. Before they could recover, he swung his arm in a wide arc, the rings trailing light. The force of the blow sent one guard crashing into the other, their bodies slamming into a stone wall with deadly impact, killing them instantly. Merlin turned to face the remaining guards, his eyes glowing with determination. He extended his arms, and the rings pulsed with pale gray energy. With a surge of power, he unleashed a series of energy blasts. The pulses shot forward, hitting the guards with unerring precision. Each blast created a shockwave on impact, sending the guards flying back and leaving them incapacitated on the ground. Merlin stood tall amidst the chaos, his eyes catching the movement of 3 more red-turbaned warriors rushing toward him with fierce determination. Merlin's gaze hardened as he raised his arms, the 10 rings gleaming with an otherworldly light. With a swift, fluid motion, he shot the rings towards the advancing enemies. They traveled at incredible speeds, streaks of blue, purple, and transparent light trailing behind them like the tails of comets or shooting stars. The rings, with their intricate engravings glowing, were a blur of lethal beauty. The first ring struck its target with pinpoint accuracy, releasing a slight concussive shockwave upon impact. The force was accompanied by a burst of energy that rippled through the air, creating a visible wave of distortion. The unfortunate warrior was sent flying backwards, his body twisting through the air before crashing into a stone wall with a sickening thud. The second ring found its mark almost simultaneously, hitting the next warrior square in the chest. The impact was like a thunderclap, the concussive force lifting the man off his feet and propelling him several meters back. His weapon flew from his grasp, clattering uselessly on the ground as he landed in a heap, unconscious. The third ring completed the deadly trio, striking the final warrior in rapid succession. The burst of energy rippled through his armor, the shockwave throwing him into the air. He tumbled head over heels before slamming into the ground, his body motionless and broken. The rings, having completed their destructive task, arced back through the air, moving through the air with graceful, almost sentient movements. Their trajectories were perfectly aligned, an intricate dance that would bring them back to their master. As they sped through the air, the rings emitted trails of blue and purple light, streaks that lingered momentarily in their wake. Just before reaching Merlin, the rings slowed down slightly. The intense light from their engravings grew even brighter, the intricate symbols glowing with a fierce energy. With a final burst of light, the ring settled back onto Merlin's forearms with a resounding, metallic click. The engravings pulsed once more before fading, the trails of light dissipating into the night. Merlin then looked at Balthazar. "Can I leave this to you, my friend?" The Nubian smiled grimly. "You go, friend. I'll take these bastards on." Here and there in the half-destroyed palace inner yard, the surviving guards were picking themselves up, regrouping. As Merlin ran to find Mnan, while Balthazar raises his sword with eager anticipation, "All right then, who dies first," as he cuts down one enemy after another. But he looked around for Takmet, that cowardly traitor. But couldn't find him. He then spotted Takmet. Takmet, riding a night-black stallion up yard. He holds lance with a hook that curls from its point. He jabs it at Balthazar, who rolls at the last second. Balthazar climbs painfully to his knees. A man on foot, a badly wounded one at that, meeting a horseman's lance with a sword was by all logic doomed to failure. And, as if proof of that wisdom, Takmet thrust his lance expertly and caught, with its hooked tip, the Nubian by his calf. Takmet jerked upward, taking Balthazar's leg out from under him. The bandit king's other foot went with it, and he went smashing backward into a stone wall, sliding down to sit awkwardly on the corridor floor. On his backside now, bleeding, breathing hard, Balthazar was cornered, the smirking Takmet looming over him from his saddle. As the prince's horse trotted almost casually up to him, Balthazar raised his hands in surrender. Takmet's smirk disappeared and a smoldering rage turned into a blaze rivaling the one in the palace around them. "Force me to kneel before you. What gives you such gall, Nubian dog? What gives you the right to ask a prince to kneel before such rabble?" And the furious Takmet drove the lance forward, aiming between those massive raised hands, both of which caught the lance, and held it fast. Takmet's eyes widened, his mouth dropped open. Balthazar's eyes burned into whatever soul the wretch in the saddle still possessed. And he answered the prince's question, "What gives me the gall?" "About 200 pounds advantage, traitor." And with a might few men could match, Balthazar yanked that lance, lifting Takmet off the saddle as if he were weightless, sending the slender prince flying, straight into a stone wall, where, as one might predict, he hit hard, like an insect into the helmet of a charging warrior. He slid down the stones, as if every bone in his body had been crushed into a puree, and puddled there, waiting for Balthazar. It was not a long wait. The Nubian, with renewed strength, strode over, hardly limping now. Somehow the stunned prince managed to draw his sword, but even he knew the fight was over. A big hand reached out and squeezed the smaller man's wrist and fingers popped open, and steel clattered impotently on the floor. "Go ahead, Nubian," Takmet said, not defiant, just weary. "End it. Use your sword." The king shook his head. And raised a fist, no larger than the average child's head, casting a shadow that blotted out the face of the only son of the late King Ashur of Melair. "This," Balthazar said, "is for your father." Then that fist came smashing straight into Takmet's wide eyes, and the last sound the prince heard was the sickening crunch of his own face, collapsing. Chapter 91, Chapter 81. The grand throne room is shrouded in shadows, lit only by the flickering flames of torches. The vast chamber echoes with the sound of Merlin's boots against the stone floor as he strides in. At the far end, Mnan stands, a menacing figure, his eyes blazing with fury and scowling. "So, you're back, wizard." Merlin, calm and composed, offers a sly smile. "Cassandra has issues with you, Mnan. As her protector, I'm here to resolve them." Memnon's face twists with rage. He slams his fist on the armrest of the throne, snarling. She guarded her chastity like a precious gem, only her diamond was nothing but glittering glass. Merlin's eyes flash with disdain as he steps forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Perhaps she simply didn't want to bestow it upon a fool. Memnon's anger boils over. He rises from the throne, drawing his swords with a swift, practiced motion and roaring. "Fight me without your cheap magic tricks." Merlin's smile widens. He raises a hand, and with a surge of energy, Excalibur materializes in his grip. The fight was about to start, but for Merlin, time seemed to decelerate the moment his fingers wrapped around the leather-bound grip of Excalibur. The engraved characters at the base of the blade ignited with a brilliant blue hue, casting an eerie glow that matched the intensity of Merlin's eyes and blade glowing with a mystical blue light. Merlin replies, "Of course." Mnan splits his swords, dual-wielding them with deadly precision. He lunges at Merlin, the swords spinning in a deadly dance. The clash of metal on metal echoes through the hall as their blades meet. Mnan is a whirlwind of steel, his attacks a blur of speed and skill. But Merlin moves with supernatural grace, parrying and dodging Mnan's strikes with ease. Time seems to slow for Merlin. Each movement is deliberate, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Excalibur's blade hums as it cuts through the air, creating shockwaves that ripple through the room. Mnan's attacks grow more frantic, his breath ragged. With a powerful swing, Merlin sends Mnan crashing back, tumbling down the steps of the altar. He collides with a flaming brazier, sending embers flying. Mnan groans but refuses to admit defeat. His eyes dart around, spotting a fallen lamp. With a desperate move, he dips his blades into the blazing oil, igniting them and breathing heavily. This isn't over, wizard. Merlin watches, his expression calm and unwavering, as Mnan rises once more, his swords now ablaze. Once more the warlord's swords danced with fire, and he charged Merlin, the whirling sword spinning, the flames a dazzling, blinding array of skill as the warlord slashed forward, sending spitting oil spraying onto the Merlin's arms. The oil droplets jumped to flame, and now, as if dealing with a warrior of Mnan's skill weren't enough, the assassin was having to take time to shake flames from himself, as if throwing off biting insects, a distraction that aided the warlord in backing Mnan up to the edge of the precipice that lined one side of the elevated courtyard. But the warlord ducked the blow, and swung his leg around, the toe of his boot sinking deep into the Maimon's side, doubling him up in pain, just in time for that same foot to kick again, catching his jaw. That straightened Mnan, only to send him staggering backward, until he crashed into a table alongside the altar steps. Maimon was dazed, barely conscious, but was not ready to give up and yelled, "Why, I am the chosen one, I am stallion who mounts the world." Mnan in some stupid daze yelled, "Hear me, gods. I am Mnan, son of Osiris, ruler of the world. And you will obey." Merlin was annoyed at this and muttered, "Shut up," and with swing his sword created a shockwave. As the great teacher, Mnan, so-called king of the world, was blown off his altar, he went sailing over the wall, down toward the city street. The warlord was like a falling star his freed subjects might make a wish upon. Below, Isis and her fellow Arios, whose eyes were bright, faces wide with smiles, as Try were not far away when Mnan's body hit with a sickening impact. The soldiers who'd been advancing on Isis and her warriors, recognizing the form of their commander-in-chief, fell back, in horrified, leaderless disarray. In the courtyard, Merlin walked to the edge of the precipice and stared down to view the broken body below. Isis and her warriors, and even the former soldiers of Mnan, were witness to an image so impressive, so indelible, all would carry it to their graves. As they looked up, the figure of the wizard stood by a huge, approving moon, the glowing orb seemingly emblazoned on it. Just then behind him, Merlin spots portal opening up and Cassandra coming out from it, with Gandalf and Philos coming behind her. Then Cassandra ran to his side, and Merlin took her into his arms, held so tightly they were as one. Her adoring gaze was matched by his own. Cassandra smiled and said, "I saw vision of the battle ending." By this time, Balthazar had found his way to the courtyard, and as he limped toward his brother in battle, he watched with amazement and pride as the remaining soldiers of Mnan's army dropped their weapons and knelt before the wizard, staring up at him in awe. A legend was unfolding before their eyes, and they would spread the word. Merlin and Cassandra were still gazing down at the fallen, torn remains of the warlord when the Nubian limped up to them, saying, "By tolling bell and thunder's swell." Cassandra remembered her prophecy and smiled at the hobbling giant, then looked up at her own giant, and added, "Flaming stars falls from the sky." And on the palace steps, as Queen Isis, gazed up through smoke and fire, captivated by the image of the godlike figure of the wizard, framed against the glowing moon, the remainder of Mnan's soldiers also threw down their weapons and fell to their knees. By a full moon's glow, Isis said, "A new emperor shall rise." Kneeling men bow to the king on high, Philos said, finishing the thought. Following the demise of Mnan, his men, bereft of leadership and overwhelmed by the prowess of Merlin, surrendered en masse. The once formidable cities under Mnan's control fell swiftly to Merlin's expanding empire. Among these were Karth, a pivotal city known for its trade routes and strategic importance; Lazosh, located in the Lazer region of Essos, southeast of Hesh and southwest of Khosrak. The trade routes from Lazosh stretched southeast through the formidable Red Waste, making it a crucial hub for commerce. Hesh, another significant city in Lazer, northwest of Lazosh and west of Khosrak. Hesh commanded the trade route through the Kaizai Pass to Meereen, further enhancing Merlin's control over the region. In addition to these, the fortified cities of Biasabad, known as the City of Serpents, and Shemiriana, positioned on the Stone Road in the eastern Bone Mountains near the Great Sand Sea, were also subdued. These cities, notable for their strategic locations and defensive fortifications, were brought under Merlin's rule by his formidable commanders, Isis and Balthazar. Merlin's conquests did not end there. His marriage to Cassandra, the powerful sorceress, cemented his control over the Red Waste, a region rich in the coveted resource, melange. His unique ability to control the fearsome sandworms facilitated the harvesting of melange, greatly enhancing his influence across Essos. However, Merlin's burgeoning power aroused the suspicion and wariness of the three great Giscari city-states, Yunkai, Astapor, and Meereen. The great masters of Astapor, the wise masters of Yunkai, and the great masters of Meereen watched with increasing unease as Merlin's dominion expanded, fearing that their own cities would soon fall under his sway. Their concerns would later prove justified as Merlin would soon conquer their cities because of his disgust for slave trade. But this would only happen a century later, at time of Magar uprising, where two of students Dastan, who is considered Prince of Karth, and Jadaka, a former slave, who vowed to end slavery in Essos. Excerpts from Legend of Merlin by scholar George from Tower of North. Chapter 92, a question. Chapter 93, notice. Chapter 94, Chapter 82. During this period in Westeros, Yavanna fell in love with Marcus Gardner. They had a son by name of Achilles. He was blessed by Eru to his body was invulnerable body. Achilles grew up and was a master in using various weapons and was an exceptionally formidable and very skillful warrior. Eru was watching young Achilles and Perseus sparring from distance with Yavanna. Eru said to Yavanna, "He is grown too fast." Yavanna, seeing her son, smiled and replied, "Yes, it is hard to see him grow up so fast." Eru smiled and said, "Daughter, at the end of the day, he will grow up and want to venture out to see the world himself." Yavanna nodded, as both walked towards the sparring duo. Perseus sparring with his cousin Achilles. Both men wield wooden practice swords. Achilles is a talented, lean, flashy young fighter. His sword whirls in the air like a thing alive. Perseus, by contrast, is the apotheosis of the efficient combatant, wasting no energy, waiting for right time to strike. Achilles presses in on the attack. Perseus tilts his head to avoid one thrust, sidesteps to avoid another. Spying a momentary opening, he lunges forward and taps Achilles' belly with the tip of his wood sword. Perseus chuckled. "You're getting fat, cousin." Achilles grins and relaunches his attack, sword spinning with blazing speed. Perseus ducks beneath an arcing swing and sword taps Achilles on the back and said, "Fancy swordplay. The girls must be impressed." Achilles grunts and charges in again. This time genuine duel develops, featuring splendid repartee and parrying. Achilles with smug tone. "A little nervous, aren't you?" Perseus smiled and replied, "Terrified." As Perseus raises his right hand and Achilles lifts his sword to parry the blow, but Perseus no longer holds his sword in his right hand. Sword in his left hand, Perseus taps Achilles on the chest. Achilles stares down at the wood blade and said, "You told me never to switch sword hands." Perseus rolls his head to loosen his neck and replied, "By the time you know how to do it, you won't be following my anymore." Perseus tosses aside the sparring sword upon seeing her grandfather and aunt arriving. While Achilles, seeing them smiled, yelled, "Mother, Grandpa. Perseus is teaching me sword fighting." Yavanna smiled at her son and replied, "That's great." Eru smiled and ruffles Achilles' hair, adding, "You will become a great warrior one day." Achilles grinned, while Perseus smiled. In Karth the hall was an imposing edifice, constructed from stone and upheld by towering pillars of black marble. The arches overhead seamlessly merged with these pillars, and deep windows on either side allowed muted light to filter in, casting dramatic shadows across the room. Merlin stood with Cassandra by his side, their presence commanding the space before them. Opposite them were Queen Isis and Balthazar, their expressions reflective as they took in their surroundings. "So, wizard," Balthazar began, his voice echoing through the hall. "What is your plan from here?" Merlin's voice was steady and authoritative. First, I want to bring stability to all cities that were under Memnon's reign. Many are eyeing it now, particularly for its rich reserves of melange. Queen Isis and Balthazar exchanged knowing glances. Melange was famed in Essos for its healing and magical properties. The rich coveted it for its ability to halt aging, but Merlin had warned them of its addictive nature. Merlin continued, I want to ensure melange doesn't spread too widely. Queen Isis inquired, so you want to control the export of melange? Merlin nodded. Yes, it is best to keep it in our hands rather than let it fall into those of tyrants and so-called masters in Yunkai, Myrene, or Astapor. Balthazar agreed. I support that. It's better in your hands than theirs. Queen Isis nodded as well. Cassandra then spoke, we were hoping you would join our kingdom. Merlin wishes to create a council rather than rule single-handedly. Balthazar and Queen Isis were taken aback by this proposal. Merlin added, you can choose any of the 4 cities for you and your people. Balthazar hesitated, while Queen Isis saw the opportunity for her people to thrive. Placing her hand on Balthazar's arm, she said, Balthazar, this is a chance for our people to have a better life. Balthazar sighed, relenting. I agree with your proposal, wizard. While Balthazar and Queen Isis went to inform their respective tribes, Merlin turned to Cassandra, holding her gently. And what do you see ahead, my royal sorceress? Cassandra, knowing he was teasing yet sensing the gravity of the moment, replied, peace. Prosperity. They embraced, kissing passionately, sealing their commitment. With the city stabilized under their rule, Merlin suggested Hesh to Balthazar, its strategic location near Slaver's Bay crucial for defense. Queen Isis chose Lazosh, staying close to Balthazar, as their bond grew stronger. Merlin's name soon echoed across Essos, even reaching noble houses in Westeros. During this time, he trained Dastan, a young man of exceptional talent in weaponry and acrobatics. One day, while freeing slaves, Merlin noticed a boy with a fierce determination in his eyes. The boy knelt before him and said, please, teach me to fight like you. Dastan sheathed his sword, he was curious, watched as Merlin studied the boy. What is your name? Merlin asked. Njadaka, sire, the boy replied. Recognizing the name, Merlin thought, Killmonger, so this is his counterpart. And your parents? Merlin inquired. Njadaka looked away, the pain evident. Merlin understood. Why do you want to learn from me? Merlin asked. Njadaka's eyes burned with anger. I want revenge on those who killed my parents. Merlin pressed, what will you do after you get revenge? After a moment's thought, Njadaka answered, I want to destroy slavery. I want no one to end up like me. Merlin smiled. I will train you. Njadaka's face lit up with hope, while Dastan looked on with curiosity at his new brother-in-arms. Everyone, follow me, Merlin commanded. As the rescued slaves, along with Njadaka and Dastan, followed Merlin, he created a portal to Karth, leading them toward a new future. While under Merlin, Njadaka became extremely skilled and formidable hand-to-hand combatant and martial artist, making him one of the most powerful and best fighters on the planet. His fighting style included multiple martial arts disciplines. Dastan was similar, became a highly skilled warrior, very skilled swordsman, very skilled spear wielder and martial artist. He also got a gift of Philos, a hidden blade. Dastan was a very skilled free-runner from a young age. He was able to move quickly and efficiently in sprinting, climbing, and jumping. In addition, he was also an extremely enduring and strong athlete, being able to perform all these actions without being encumbered by his large variety of weapons and armor. His skill and speed as a free runner only increased, being aware of all of his surroundings as well as planning his next move very quickly and carefully. Just 10 years after Memnon's defeat, Merlin heard tales of Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys Targaryen were conquering Westeros with their dragons. Chapter 95, Chapter 83. Merlin had completed his work on the flyers and lightships, devices he envisioned revolutionizing transportation between the cities. His workshop buzzed with energy, the metallic smell of fresh machinery mingling with the crisp morning air. The flyer, now ready for its maiden voyage, stood gleaming under the sun. It was an impressive contraption, a sleek, cylindrical body equipped with instrument controls, a panoramic windscreen, and metallic wings that stretched out to gather solar energy. Merlin approached the flyer, his eyes alight with anticipation. Securing himself in the rear seat, he deftly powered up the engine. It sprang to life with a deep, throaty roar, resonating with potential. The flyer lifted off the ground, propelled by the steady thrum of its engine. Merlin guided it skyward, gradually increasing speed as he familiarized himself with the controls. The craft responded eagerly, banking sharply at his command, before looping gracefully back towards the city. Below, Cassandra, Dastan, Jadaka, Balthazar, and Queen Isis watched in awe as Merlin piloted the flyer back to the ground. It landed smoothly before them, the engine's roar dying down to a whisper. Balthazar's eyes were wide with amazement. "This could change everything," he murmured, the weight of the statement hanging in the air. Queen Isis nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. From war to transporting goods, she added thoughtfully, envisioning the future these innovations could usher in. Cassandra knew that Merlin had bigger plans in store, the lightships being just the beginning of his vision. Merlin led the group to the courtyard where a lightship awaited, its grand form a testament to his genius. The ship was a marvel, wishbone-shaped with mechanical feathers, built from a delicate balance of glass and rope. Its wings, spanning 100 meters, were comprised of solar panel-like tiles that adjusted to capture the sun's rays, creating a mesmerizing dance of light. Dastan whispered, "Amazing," as he marveled at the ship's elegant design. Balthazar, thinking strategically, saw the broader implications. "These ships will connect our cities, and bring reinforcements when needed," he said, his voice filled with optimism. As they discussed the future, Cassandra remembered urgent news. "We received word from Westeros," she announced, her tone serious. "The Targaryens have already conquered Westerland, Vale, Stormlands, and Riverlands." Merlin sighed, his expression somber. "So, it's begun," he murmured, contemplating the challenges ahead. Cassandra turned to Merlin with a question. "Will you go there?" Merlin nodded, resolute. "Yes. The major regions, Dorne, Reach, and the North, will be crucial allies. They each have roles to play in the coming events." Merlin has already made contact with Reach, Dorne, and North. In Westeros, Aegon Targaryen arrived with his sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, accompanied by their mighty dragons, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meryxes. Their conquest of Westeros began with the successful subjugation of the Westerlands, Vale, Stormlands, and Riverlands. Along their path to dominance, they formed an alliance with King Larenai Lannister of the Rock. However, the House of Gardner maintained a neutral stance towards the Targaryens, neither hostile nor friendly. The Reach posed a unique challenge as King Mnan Gardner had only a daughter named Merlin Gardner, whom he married to a promising man named Marius Tyrell. The agreement stipulated that Marius's offspring would bear both the Gardner and Tyrell names, co-ruling the Reach as king and queen. With their new conquests, Aegon faced a pressing concern, dealing with the North, Reach, and Dorne, marked on the map respectively by the dire wolf, roses, and sword and snake sigils. Visenya, standing beside Aegon, was the embodiment of classical Valyrian beauty, exuding an austere demeanor. Her sister, Rhaenys, was known for her sensual and passionate nature. Aegon, deep in thought, muttered, "We are going to have a hard time dealing with these kingdoms." Curious, Rhaenys asked, "What do you mean by that, Aegon?" Orys Baratheon, Aegon's half-brother, he chimed in, "What Aegon means is, we must not underestimate the North, Dorne or Reach, as they are supported by the ancient gods. They have a giant beast that breathes ice and a giant wolf guarding their borders. The Reach is famous for Yggdrasil, but also notorious for a venomous golden dragon that breathes poison. And Dorne has two giant serpents guarding them, with its desert battleground, is challenging to conquer." Orys Baratheon was a well-traveled man who had explored many corners of Westeros and delved deep into its history through the Baratheon library. Having extensively studied the lore and legends, Orys was familiar with the powerful deities, the magical beasts controlled by the Gardner and Stark families, and the renowned demigods like Achilles of Reach and Karna of Dorne. He recognized that the North, Dorne, and Reach owed much of their prosperity and strength to their connections with these divine entities. Furthermore, Orys learned about the blessings once bestowed upon the Baratheons and Lannisters, which they lost when they turned away from the ancient gods in favor of following the faith of the Seven. This knowledge had a profound impact on Orys, leading him to adopt a more open-minded and cautious approach to the world around him. As Orys shared his insights with Aegon and Visenya, he emphasized the importance of understanding the cultural and religious beliefs of the regions they sought to conquer. Visenya nodded. Had done research of her own. She had to dig a little deep since Faith of Seven was trying hard to curb the influence of ancient gods in South. While researching, she found many amazing things about the ancient gods, Reach, Dorne and North. So he added her insights. These legendary figures like the demigods of Reach, Achilles, and Dorne's Karna. If they entered the battle, things would be bad. Plus, the House of Teeps in the north and House Dane in Dorne are renowned for their skilled swordsmen. Aegon nodded in agreement and continued, even with all three dragons, victory is uncertain, as these realms are united in their alliance. Visenya murmured, if we lose the dragons, we lose everything. Rhaenys recalled their grandmother's wisdom. Indeed, attacking them could anger the gods and lead to dire consequences. Taking a deep breath, Aegon made a decision. We will seek alliances and, if needed, consider marriages to solidify our position. We need them all for the future. Orys nodded, while Rhaenys and Visenya offered their support, with Visenya also devising strategies to win the North's allegiance. Yet, despite their efforts, Aegon couldn't shake the feeling that his visions of a dark future held imminent danger, the true nature of which remained uncertain. While same time Horus fell in love with wildling named Hilla, and Mandos during Maegor's reign would fall in love with Torrhen Stark, Joanna Stark. Chapter 96, Chapter 84. Snowflakes drift from the grey sky, settling gently on the stone courtyard of Winterfell. The towering walls stand as silent witnesses to the gathering of powerful lords and ladies within. In the great hall of Winterfell. The hall is dimly lit by flickering torches, casting long shadows across the stone floor. At the head of a long table, Merlin sits flanked by Dasta and Jadaka, his students. Before them are the three kings of Westeros, Torrhen Stark, a brooding and steadfast northern lord, Mnan, a regal figure from the Reach with an air of authority, and Lorik Dane Martell, a sharp-eyed ruler with a hint of mischief in his smile. Merlin, leaning forward, questioned. So, you must already have plans for the Targaryens. Lorik Martell, smiling slightly, answered. We've heard whispers. The Targaryen ambitions are no secret. Our networks keep us well informed. Mnan nods, the weight of his own intelligence network apparent in his measured demeanor. Torrhen Stark listens intently, his trusted friend Ingrius Teeps at his side. He remembered this friend's words. In this game, honor means little. It's all about how you play the game. The fire crackles as Loren speaks, his voice steady and clear. Aegon Targaryen landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, building the Aegon Fort. His presence was known to all the great lords. Lord Darklyn of Duskendale and Lord Mutton of Maidenpool rallied against him but were crushed by Dragonfire and Targaryen steel. Merlin nods thoughtfully and muttered. A dragon can change the outcome of any battle, regardless of numbers. The kings exchange knowing glances, understanding the power they face. Injurus adds with a wry smile. Ans continued. After their defeat, the lords bent the knee, swelling the Targaryen ranks with men and resources. Aegon was crowned at Aegon Fort, proclaiming himself king. Mnan spoke up. After the battle, they took time to recuperate. But Aegon Targaryen, Lord of Dragonstone, made his intentions clear. He aims to conquer Westeros and unite the Seven Kingdoms under his rule. Loren Dane Martell lets out a derisive laugh, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Lorik snorting added. And this is when the foolish Queen Shara Arryn, acting as regent for her son Ronal Arryn, King of Mountain and Vale, thought it wise to send her portrait to Aegon, offering marriage on the condition he name Ronal his heir. Naturally, Aegon refused. Mnan joins in with a scoff, his voice dripping with disdain. What did the old cow think? Has she gone mad? Torrhen Stark, his face shadowed and thoughtful, mutters under his breath. The Vale is known for producing a few crazy ones from time to time. Mern and Loren share a knowing nod, while Injurus Teeps, ever the strategist, adds his insight. They also do produce quite a few insightful and manipulative ones. Torrhen continued. After being crowned at the Blackwater Rush, Aegon dispatched his fleet, led by Daemon Valerian, to seize Gulltown. With him went Visenya Targaryen, formidable as ever. Merlin nods, recalling how Daemon Valerian's loyalty to the Targaryens was rewarded with promises of a noble marriage, his lineage intertwining with the Dragonlords through Corlys and Rhaenys. Torrhen added. The Arryns, scrambling, assembled their fleet, bolstered by Braavosi warships. The clash at Gulltown was brutal. The Arryns managed to decimate part of the Targaryen fleet, and Daemon nearly lost his life. But Visenya, riding the dragon Vagr, rained fire upon them. Lorik added. Though they didn't lose outright, the Targaryens' failure to capture Gulltown was a strategic setback. The hall grows quiet, the weight of these revelations settling in. The fire crackles, shadows dancing across the walls. Torrin adding. The sistermen on the Three Sisters took advantage of the chaos. With the Arryn fleet destroyed, they revolted, proclaiming Marla Sunderland their queen. The great hall is filled with the rich aroma of burning pine as Merlin sits back in his chair, striking a match to light his pipe. He inhales deeply, then exhales a perfect smoke ring, watching as it floats upward. Within the ring, a tiny sailing ship appears, its masts and sails casting delicate shadows in the firelight. Mern after a pause. The next battle, known as the Last Storm, unfolded when Argilac Durrandon, the aged Storm King, sought to use Aegon Targaryen, Lord of Dragonstone, as a shield against Harrenhal, King of the Isles and the Rivers. Argilac, in his desperation, offered Aegon the hand of his daughter, Argella, along with lands east of the God's Eye between the Trident and the Blackwater Rush. Once controlled by the Stormlands, this territory was now under House Hoare's rule. But Aegon, seeing the folly in the offer, made a counterproposal. He demanded Massey's Hook and lands between the Blackwater, the Wendwater, and the Mander, territory long held by the Stormlands, in exchange for Argella's marriage to Orys Baratheon, Aegon's friend and rumored half-brother. Enraged, Argilac cut off the hands of Aegon's envoy and sent them back with a message, "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me." Merlin nods thoughtfully, the flickering firelight catching in his eyes. Lorik Dane Martell sighs, the weight of the past heavy in his voice. Argilac's response ignited Aegon's wrath. After landing at the mouth of the Blackwater, Aegon was crowned by Visenya, one of his sister wives. He swiftly gained the allegiance of the Rivellins by burning Harrenhal and killing King Hoare. Meanwhile, Orys Baratheon and Rhaenys, Aegon's other sister wife, moved against the Stormlands. Argilac, refusing to fall like the Arryns, called his banners to Storm's End. Lords Buckler, Errol, and Fell ambushed Orys Van on the Wendwater and then retreated into the Kingswood. Rhaenys retaliated by unleashing Merryxes, setting the forest ablaze with dragon fire. Merlin listens, the room silent except for the crackling of the fire. The air is thick with tension and anticipation. Lorik continuing. The Stormlands faced further turmoil as pirates attacked Cape Wrath from the Stepstones. Rhaenys, atop Merryxes, tracked Argilac's movements while Orys fortified a position in the hills south of Bronzegate. As the armies clashed, a fierce storm broke, with rain lashing the Targaryen host. Confident in his numbers, Argilac, having almost twice the men and 4 times the knights and heavy horse, chose to press the attack. Mern 9, noticing Loren Dane Martell's parched throat, raises a hand to speak. During the initial clash, Argilac's horsemen struggled against the muddy ground and steep slopes. However, his spearmen found success on foot, capturing 2 hills. In Argilac's 4th charge, his forces broke through the enemy center, only to face Rhaenys atop Merryxes, the dragon grounded by the storm. Visenya unleashed Dragonflame upon Dickon Moraigen and the Bastard of Blackhaven, leaders of the Durrandon vanguard. Argilac's personal guard perished in the inferno, and the Storm King was thrown from his saddle in the chaos. Even in confusion, Argilac fought fiercely, slaying 6 men and holding off another 6 as Orys rode down the hill to meet him. The great hall falls silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Merlin watches as Mern pauses, the weight of history hanging heavy in the room. Mern continued. Argilac refused Orys' offer to yield, choosing instead to engage in single combat. Both warriors took wounds, but Argilac met his end as he wished, dying in battle. With his death, the fight ended, and the Stormlanders yielded or fled. Mern sighs deeply, the echoes of past battles lingering in his words. In the aftermath of her father's death, Princess Argella Durrandon declared herself Storm Queen and barred the gates of Storm's End. Her garrison, fearing the fate of Harrenhal, soon revolted. After a few days, they delivered her to Orys, chained and naked. Orys, showing mercy, removed her chains, covered her with his cloak, and offered her food and wine. He later married Argella, becoming Lord Paramount of the Stormlands. The sigil and words of House Durrandon became those of the newly founded House Baratheon. Following the Stormland's submission, Rhaenys flew from Storm's End to support Aegon at the Field of Fire. The lords sit in contemplative silence, reflecting on the shifting tides of power and the role of women in their history. Torrhen Stark, Mnan, and Lorraine Dane Martell exchange glances, their expressions respectful. Some of their greatest ancestors were queens: Winter Queen Lyra Stark, Dorne's Queen Nymeria, and Reach Green Queen Rena Gardner. They have never doubted a woman's strength to rule. But Argella was not ready nor taught to be a queen. Tankards of ale and goblets of wine before them. Ingeras, holding a goblet of wine, leans back in his chair and speaks with a measured, thoughtful tone. While sipping his wine added. After the submission of Harrenhal, Crackclaw Point, and Storm's End, Aegon and his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, gathered at Stony September with their dragons. The bulk of House Targaryen's forces were conscripts from the newly liberated Riverlands. Lord John Mutton of Maidenpool, one of the first lords to swear loyalty to the Targaryens, was entrusted with command of their army. Ingeras pauses, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The room is silent, save for the occasional crackle of the fire before continuing. But their trials were far from over. Larenai Lannister, King of the Rock, fearful of the dragon's power, allied with the surviving sons of King Hor, who had escaped through hidden tunnels. With Loren's wealth, he hired mercenaries to bolster their ranks, aiming to repel the Targaryen invaders. Between the two kings, they mustered around 55,000 men, 5 times the number of Targaryen forces, including 5,000 mounted knights. Ingeras sets his goblet down, leaning forward to emphasize his next point. The armies clashed on the plains south of the Blackwater, near the present Gold Road. The two kings hoped to outflank Aegon and smash his center with their knights. However, the Targaryens had established a defensive crescent. As the allies charged, breaking the Targaryen spear lines, Aegon and his sisters took to the skies on their dragons, Baelryan, Merryx's, and Vhagar. The dragons set the dry fields ablaze, encircling the Hor and Lannister armies in flames. Safely positioned upwind, Lord Mutton's forces finished off any allied soldiers who escaped the inferno. King Loren Lannister, seeing the battle lost, rode through the flames to safety. The dragons claimed the lives of 4,000 men from the combined Lannister and Hor army. The lords exchange glances, the enormity of the Targaryen victory clear in their expressions. Torrhen Stark, contemplating the events, adds his perspective. From what I heard, many river lords were coerced into fighting by Hor's sons, and some were bought with Lannister gold, but almost all fled during the chaos. It seems interestingly, amidst the flames and confusion, few noticed the Tully army had never engaged in battle, ensuring their survival. Aegon and Visenya observed this and rewarded the Riverlands to the Tullys. Merlin, with a thoughtful expression, leans forward, observing the lords gathered around the table. So seeing that the conversation has ended, he questions. So, what are you going to do? Torrhen Stark, his face a mask of contemplation, answers with measured words. Aegon seems to understand that neither Dorne, the Reach, nor the North is easily conquered without risking their dragons. The lords exchange glances, knowing the truth in Torrhen's words. Ingeras Teeps adds his insight, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, which means they'll likely seek alliances. Losing a dragon is a risk they can ill afford. Merlin nods, pondering the implications. The lords lean in closer, sensing he has more to offer. I'll give you some advice. The room grows silent, the lords hanging on his every word. Merlin, centuries old and wise beyond measure, commands their respect. His wife, a renowned seer, adds weight to his counsel. Torrhen, leaning forward, questioned. And what would that be, Merlin? Merlin meets each of their gazes, his voice calm and steady. Meet with the Targaryens. They have their reasons for conquering Westeros. It might be worth hearing them out. The lords exchange curious glances, intrigued by Merlin's suggestion. They know his advice is not given lightly and is often guided by foresight. Mern hummed and questioned. You believe there's more to their conquest than ambition? Merlin nods, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Indeed. Understanding their motives might offer you a way to shape the future rather than merely reacting to it. Loren Dane leans back, considering the wisdom in Merlin's words. The crackle of the fire punctuates the silence as the lords ponder their next move. Chapter 97, Notice. Chapter 98, Chapter 85 Extra. Merlin stood within the ancient halls of the castle gifted to him by Torrhen Stark. Merlin stood before a large oak table. On it lay a mesmerizing collection of artifacts, each shimmering with an otherworldly aura. The castle itself, a gift from Torrhen Stark, loomed above them, its ancient towers whispering tales of old. But tonight, it was not the history of Westeros that drew attention, but the magic Merlin had brought to its heart. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows as Merlin waved his hand, conjuring swirling portals from thin air. From these shimmering gateways stepped Cassandra, Dastan, and Jadaka. Merlin smiled and welcomed them to Westeros. He discussed everything that was happening in Essos and Westeros. Then gestured towards the table and said, "Before you go back, I have some gifts for you." Their eyes widening as they beheld the Merlin's lair. Laid out before them on a weathered table was a breathtaking array of artifacts, each humming with ancient power. Merlin, with a knowing smile, gestured towards the treasures. The first artifact was an anklet, its design breathtakingly intricate. Two raised sections resembled stylized horns or wings, flanking a central carving of a fierce, mythical monkey, Vanara. The monkey's face was expressive, its sharp eyes and snarling mouth capturing the essence of a primal force. The anklet gleamed with a metallic sheen, likely bronze, and bore the scars of time, its surface etched with ancient patterns that hinted at forgotten ceremonies and ancient battles. Next was the Nandi Astra, an ornately designed bracelet shaped like the curved horns of a mighty bull. The horns were thick and robust, curling outward with the power to shatter mountains. At the center, a stylized carving of a bull's face, eyes fierce and unyielding, radiated strength. The bracelet appeared to be crafted from an ancient, stone-like material, its rugged texture telling tales of countless battles. Intricate carvings ran along the horns and bull's face, marking it as both sacred and formidable. Then there was the Gajastra, a massive, triangular shield that seemed to pulse with power. At its center was an intricate carving of an elephant's head, the eyes glowing with a haunting blue hue. The elephant's tusks were sharp and imposing, and its long trunk coiled with purpose. Swirling patterns, reminiscent of ancient Indian art, adorned the surface, enhancing its mystical aura. The shield's edges were carved with additional symbols, adding to its ceremonial presence. The Prabhastra lay nearby, a sword of dark, metallic glory. The blade was slightly curved, its surface etched with runes and symbols that spoke of deadly purpose. The hilt was carved to resemble a fierce animal's head, perhaps a lion or dragon, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The handle was textured with a pattern of scales, providing both grip and aesthetic appeal. The sword had the appearance of a relic from an age when gods walked the earth, its presence commanding respect and fear. Beside it was the Nagdhanush, a bow that seemed almost alive. The bow's limbs were wrapped by two serpents, their bodies coiled and their scales detailed with unnerving precision. The snakes' heads faced each other, their eyes locked in an eternal stare, their mouths open as if ready to strike. The bow was both slender and powerful, a weapon that could strike down foes with the speed of a viper. The next artifact was a pendant shaped like a droplet of water, its design fluid and dynamic. It shimmered with a glowing blue hue, the color of a mountain spring, and its surface was adorned with swirling patterns that seemed to flow like currents. The pendant radiated an aura of calm and adaptability, embodying the essence of water itself. The artifact that followed was another pendant, this one carved with the majestic image of an eagle, its wings spread wide as if ready to soar. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each feather detailed to perfection, capturing the spirit of the skies. Lastly, there was the Tendu Astra, a metallic ring that bore the carving of a panther. The panther's eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire, its gaze both predatory and protective. The ring was sleek and deadly, much like the beast it represented. Merlin watched as Dastan and Jadaka approached the table, their expressions a mix of awe and curiosity. Jadaka's gaze was immediately drawn to the Tendu Astra, the panther's fierce eyes mirroring his own intensity. Dastan, on the other hand, found his attention captured by the Vanara anklet, the spirit of the warrior monkey resonating deeply within him. Cassandra, ever curious, finally broke the silence. "Are these the Astras you spoke of?" Merlin nodded, a proud smile playing on his lips. "Yes, each one unique, forged with ancient magic. They will grant you power, far beyond what you have known. Choose wisely, for they will become part of you." Without hesitation, Jadaka reached for the panther ring. The moment his fingers brushed against it, he felt a surge of energy course through his veins. "This," Merlin said, pointing at the ring, "is the Tendu Astra. It will enhance your strength, durability, speed, agility, and senses beyond that of any mortal. Your reflexes will be razor-sharp, and your healing unmatched. With this, you will see in the dark, hear whispers from miles away, and track enemies by their scent. It is more than just a weapon, it is a part of you now. Dastan, entranced by the anklet, picked it up. And that, Merlin continued, is the Vanarastra. It grants not just strength and speed, but the agility and endurance of the Vanara. You'll leap across mountains and scale walls with ease. In your hands, it will bring legends to life. Both men stood, holding their chosen astras, feeling the immense power within them. The room seemed to vibrate with their energy, the air thick with anticipation. We must test them, Dastan said, his voice filled with excitement. Merlin nodded, watching as they both stepped back toward the portal that would take them to Essos. As they disappeared, the castle grew silent once more, the artifacts on the table waiting for their next owner. Cassandra moved closer to Merlin, her curiosity replaced by warmth as she nestled into his embrace. I missed you, she whispered, her voice soft against his chest. Merlin chuckled, kissing her forehead. I was only gone for 2 days. But it felt like an eternity, she replied, a playful smirk on her lips. Merlin responded by peppering her face and neck with tender kisses, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten. You should take one of the astras for protection, Merlin suggested, his voice low and sincere. Cassandra snorted softly, leaning into him. You've already given me more than enough protection, Merlin, she murmured, her words laced with affection. But upon Merlin's insistence she took the pendant with eagle carving. It was the Pawanastra. Cassandra then questioned. Did you meet with Targaryens? Merlin answered. I will, after their meeting with the Alliance. Chapter 99, Chapter 86. Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys thundered across the forest on their horses, accompanied by some of their trusted men. They were on their way to Winterfell to meet Torrhen Stark and discuss the possibility of forming an alliance. Torrhen had informed them that Mnan Gardner and Loren Dane Martell would also be present at the meeting, and Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys were okay with that. As they slowed down to rest their horses, Aegon surveyed the surroundings from his horse. Rhaenys muttered, "Why couldn't we come on our dragons?" Visenya, slightly annoyed, replied, "Because that would send the wrong message. We want to make an alliance with them, not make them our enemies." They soon wheeled their horses around and thundered off towards Winterfell. When they arrived, Aegon recognized the 3 individuals awaiting them. King Torrhen Stark stood before them, lean and tall with a shaggy head of dark hair flecked with gray, and keen gray eyes. He wielded the Stark family ancestral sword. Breezinger, next to him was his trusted advisor and friend Ingerus Teeps, Lord of House of Teeps. While Loren Martell Dane was middle-aged man with reddish-copper skin and red tattoos on his face and body, next to him was. Offering a fake smile, Torrhen said, "Welcome to Winterfell." Sensing the tense atmosphere, Aegon replied with a smile, "Yes, I have heard many things about the famous home of the Starks." Aegon also gave respects to King of Reach, Mnan and King of Dorne Loren Martell Dane. Torrhen nodded and led them inside. Visenya was awed by the design of the place, noticing that Winterfell was thriving. Winterfell was a massive castle complex, spanning several acres and protected by massive concentric walls, resembling the rings of a tree. At its heart was the Castle of Starks, surrounded by the winter town outside the outer circle. Inside the walls, dozens of courtyards and small open spaces served as training and practice areas. Winterfell's towers and halls featured diamond-shaped window panes. Upon entering the castle, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya felt the warmth surrounding them. Ingerus Teeps noticed their awe and smiled, saying, "It is the natural hot springs. The water is piped through walls and chambers to heat them, making Winterfell more comfortable than other castles during the harsh northern winters." Then they were led to the meeting hall, which featured a long table and a massive hearth with a wolf's head carved into the stone above it. They all took their seats. Being blunt, Torrhen asked, "So what does the great Aegon the Conqueror want with a small kings like us?" Aegon chuckled at the straightforward question, as he hadn't heard such talk in a while. He decided to be honest and replied, "I want an alliance with your fellow kingdoms through marriage, either to my future daughter or granddaughter." Upon hearing this, Torrhen, Mnan and Loren's expression turned thoughtful, likely considering the connection between Aegon's Valyrian heritage and the ancient gods, which might have influenced their decision to forge alliances in Westeros. While Torrhen was not able to command Bewilderbeast, the rest of TH knew they each held every powerful. Ingerus studied Aegon and asked, "There is something else, isn't there? you didn't choose Westeros on a whim. From what I understand, Essos has been pleading with you to intervene in the free cities. You could have easily made them follow you with your dragons and Valyrian heritage. There was no need to please the people of Westeros, who still see you as an outsider. There's something more that made you come to Westeros. Aegon's eyes widened, and Rhaenys and Visenya were equally shocked. Aegon saw this as an opportunity to reveal his vision. He took a deep breath and explained, "You probably know about Daenerys the Dreamer, who foresaw the doom of Valyria. Torrhen Stark, Indras Teeps, Mern Gardner, and Loren Dane Martell nodded as Aegon continued. I also had a vision of sorts, like a terrible winter gusting out of the distant north, that would destroy the world of the living." It was a white figure with glowing blue eyes. Upon hearing this, Torrhen, Indras, Loren, and Mern understood the gravity of the situation. Torrhen slumped into his chair, muttering, "So they are coming back, the White Walkers are back." Torrhen had taken Aegon's warning about the White Walkers seriously and had already started recruiting people to guard the wall. Though he wished it wasn't true, he knew he had to prepare for the impending threat. This caught Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya's interest, as they had heard tales of the White Walkers but hadn't fully believed in their existence. Many considered such stories to be mere myths or children's tales. Aegon asked, "Are these the same White Walkers from the tales of the Long Night?" Mern nodded and answered, "Yes, our ancestors were warned by the ancient gods of their existence, and because of that, we were able to gather enough people to fend off their first invasion." Loren added, "My ancestor, Eldon Dane, fought in that war." He described how an army of ice-covered beings emerged from the darkness, riding their dead horses and hunting with their packs of pale spiders, big as hounds. Most Undals might consider these stories to be old tales meant to scare children, but they are very much real. Visenya then questioned, "Why does everyone think they are myths now?" Torrhen sighed and replied, "The people of the north, Dorne, and the Reach know it's true, but most in the south have erased such history during the Undal invasion. The faith of the Seven ensured the purge of any records during that time. So, the White Walkers have faded into legend over the centuries. People know of them only through stories, which have slowly become considered children's tales. The only ones who still believe in their existence are the North, Dorne, and the Reach, as we have maintained hand records from our ancestors." Aegon looked at Rhaenys and Visenya, and both of them nodded in understanding. With a small smile, Aegon said, "It seems we have a lot to talk about then." Chapter 100, Chapter 87. Rhaenys, the skilled negotiator, and along with her sister Visenys, who was skilled in politics. They spent a whole month meticulously crafting the contract that would bind the three kingdoms of Dorne, Reach, and North. Initially, the terms heavily favored these regions, ensuring they retained their autonomy and authority. They were still kings of Dorne, Reach and North. The first clause dictated that the Targaryens must never interfere in the internal affairs of Reach, Dorne, or North. Matters such as choosing their own heir or heiress, and even altering their laws, required the explicit permission of their respective leaders. The second condition pertained to trade. Dorne, Reach and North would help four kingdoms with trading. But this would be taken for granted by the future generation of Targaryens. Dorne, Reach and North were okay with this and was ready to sell their goods at lesser price, and they were also willing to pay a Targaryen house small amount as taxes to keep the stability of four kingdoms. But this clause didn't mean four kingdoms could randomly impose taxes on them, since T.B. His was Alliance way of showing they are sincere in wanting to help Thr Targaryens fight the White Walkers in the future. The most advantageous clause granted the kingdoms the right to sever ties with the Targaryen dynasty should they suffer any form of injustice or maltreatment. This provision granted them the ultimate power to break away from the Targaryen rule at any time, safeguarding their freedom and sovereignty. Although Visenya harbored reservations about the last condition, her counterparts, Torrhen Stark, Mern Gardner, and Loren Dane Martell, remained steadfast in their stance. They refused to waver, recognizing the importance of this clause to protect their kingdom's interests. In contrast, Aegon, the wise and pragmatic ruler, accepted the terms wholeheartedly. He understood that aligning with these powerful allies was crucial to combat the impending darkness threatening the realm. Thus, he willingly embraced the agreement. In the heart of Old Town, Aegon's reign began with the anointment by the High Septon, marking the convergence of both ancient gods that his wives followed. It was a carefully devised method to reconcile their differing faiths and ensure harmony in the realm. One fateful day, as Rhaenys and Visenya embraced the ancient gods, the throne room was bathed in a blinding flash of light. In its wake, a shimmering, translucent figure materialized. It was Hathor, the goddess of love. The sight left the Targaryens and all in attendance awestruck, for they had only heard tales of the gods but had never fathomed witnessing one in person. Hathor's radiant smile graced King Aegon, Queen Rhaenys, and Queen Visenya as she spoke with a celestial aura. I have been sent by Era to extend his regards on your coronation, young king. With a graceful wave of her hand, an oath stone materialized before the Targaryen family. They recognized the significance of the stone, knowing it to be a symbol of divine blessings. Hathor bestowed her words upon them. May your reign be prosperous, young king and queens. Overwhelmed with reverence, Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys bowed humbly before the divine presence. Hathor's gaze lingered on the trio, imparting a loving benediction. May you three have a life of boundless beauty and love together. With her blessing, Hathor bestowed upon them a divine marriage, and then she gently faded away. The revelation spread like wildfire among the gathered crowd, sparking whispers of excitement. Many believed that this divine visitation signified the approval of the ancient gods for Aegon's ascent to the throne. Filled with joy and gratitude, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya celebrated the divine blessing with a grand ball and a majestic tournament. The entire realm reveled in the momentous occasion, as their beloved king and his queens embarked on a new chapter of their extraordinary reign. Rather than ruling from Old Town or Dragonstone, Aegon chose to make his seat King's Landing, the new settlement growing around the Aegon fort. He also took the swords of his defeated enemies, forging them into the Iron Throne. Aegon also began what would become known as the Small Council, as well as that of the Hand of the King, with Lord Orys Baratheon becoming his first hand. Aegon's first established law was the King's Peace, which forbid conflict in the realm without the leave of the Iron Throne. Aegon treated the defeated lords with respect and allowed each region to retain its own laws and customs, and for the lords to retain both the right of pit and gallows and the first night. During that, rumors spread like wildfire about a mysterious white-haired mage traversing the realm, using his extraordinary powers to heal ordinary folk. Curiosity gripped Aegon, and Rhaenys shared the same intrigue, wondering aloud, he must be a descendant of Valyrian house, who were sorcerers. Aegon pondered and muttered. Only Valyrian sorcerer well known is Merlin from Essos. Aegon had heard tales about Merlin the sorcerer from his parents. It always awed him, especially since Valyrian sorcerers disappeared with the doom of Valyria. Only one alive was Merlin and his grandparents. Visenya, however, furrowed her brows, pondering a different aspect. It's possible, but what I truly wish to understand is his purpose here. Unable to resist the temptation to meet this enigmatic figure, Aegon ventured towards the village where the whispers and tales originated. As they approached, they spotted the mage, draped in a robe crafted from the most exquisite fabrics, yet emanating an air of modesty. His long, silvery white hair shimmered like a rainbow under the gentle caress of sunlight. In the village square, they witnessed a man with a bleeding wound on his head slowly making his way to the healer. With a simple nod, the mage gently placed his hand upon the wound, and a soft glow emanated from his touch. Before their very eyes, the wound closed up, leaving no trace of the injury behind, not even a scar. Awestruck, Aegon couldn't help but marvel, this is truly astonishing. Visenya and Rhaenys were equally astounded, their mouths agape with amazement. Determined to learn more, Visenya turned to a nearby villager and inquired, "What is this man's name?" The humble villager bowed respectfully and replied, "My lord," the sorcerer introduced himself as Merlin. Visenya's eyes lit up, asking further, "Does he not have a last name?" The villager hesitated, "We have not heard of one, my lady." Rhaenys chimed in, "He must have come here after hearing about you." Aegon nodded. Contemplating, indeed, it is a plausible theory. Concern clouded Visenya's face as she expressed her worry, allowing such a powerful figure to roam freely in our kingdoms might not be wise. As Aegon was about to caution the others not to provoke a powerful mage and king like Merlin. While Merlin turned towards them and boomed, "Welcome, King Aegon, Queen Visenya, and Rhaenys Targaryen." Startled, the trio emerged from their hiding place. With a graceful gesture, the enigmatic figure, now identified as Merlin, stood up and offered a deep bow, saying, "It is an honor to meet you." Aegon's curiosity was piqued, and he inquired, "Are you really Merlin from Essos?" Merlin smiled enigmatically and replied, "Yes, I am." Taking this as confirmation, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya bombarded Merlin with questions about his origin and the reasons for his presence. "I heard about your conquest and wanted to meet," the new king of 4 kingdoms, Merlin revealed, his eyes gleaming with ancient wisdom. The trio was fascinated by Merlin's experiences and eagerly invited him as a guest to King's Landing. On their way, Visenya couldn't help but be curious about his abilities, remarking, "I've heard many tales about your mastery of not only healing magic but also elemental and conjuration spells." Merlin humbly acknowledged, providing brief descriptions of his remarkable powers. Aegon felt elated to have such a figure on his side, while Merlin confessed, "Unfortunately, my abilities have been met with disapproval by some lords due to their religious beliefs." As Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys frowned, they were well aware of the faith of the Seven's conservative stance. The faith traditionally held several rights. Apart from the right to maintain its own military orders, the faith also had the right to hold its own ecclesiastical courts to try servants of the faith accused of wrongdoing, who were exempt from being tried in the lordly courts of local monarchs. In addition, the faith's substantial wealth and properties were exempt from taxation. King Aegon I Targaryen tread lightly with the faith and upheld all of these rights during his reign, while there had attempts to get Visenya and Rhaenys to renounce ancient gods, which hasn't been successful, since ancient gods had even more influence and followers. It's just they do not have high restriction, nor their respective temples care about it, since many who are priests/priestess of Eru or other ancient gods like Ulmo, Surya, Yavanna, Matos, Set, Nephthys, Hathor, Horus and Anubis were considered honored, and every one of the ones who were chosen to be priests and priestesses of these gods were esteemed, living prosperous lives, even though none of them have huge, luxurious cathedrals. Despite the efforts of the faith to curb the worship of ancient gods flourished with time, gaining more followers. While the southern regions still remained strongholds of the faith, ordinary people of the said region gradually would start to embrace the ancient gods, including followers of deities like Ulmo, Surya, Yavanna, Matos, Set, Nephthys, Hathor, Horus, and Anubis. With time, Aegon and Merlin forged a deep bond, and the mage became one of the king's closest friends and advisors. Recognizing Merlin's vast knowledge and expertise in not magic just magic, Aegon honored him with a significant role in the council, bestowing him the title of Master of Arcane. As the years passed, Merlin's presence as an ally and counsel would prove invaluable to the Targaryen dynasty. Chapter 101, Chapter 88. In the land of Westeros, Aegon the Conqueror stood tall, having sired 2 sons that would shape the fate of his dynasty. From the love he shared with Rhaenys came Aenys, a prince who embodied his mother's gentleness and grace. With Visenya, his more fierce and formidable queen, he had another son, Maegor, a child born with the fire and iron that would soon define his legacy. The realm was divided in its whispers, sensing that the paths of these 2 brothers would lead to a future where power, loyalty, and ambition would collide. Meanwhile, far across the wall, in a land untamed by the laws of Westeros, another lineage of power began to stir. Horus, god of sky, had fallen deeply in love with El, a woman whose spirit matched his fierce heart. Together, they bore a daughter, Hippolyta, whose future would be the stuff of legend. She would grow to become a figure of immense strength and wisdom, a woman whose name would be spoken with reverence and awe. Hippolyta would defy the norms of the male-dominated wildling clans beyond the wall, forming her own tribe, one composed entirely of women warriors. Her leadership was fierce, her tactics unmatched, and soon, her tribe became one of the strongest north of the wall, feared and respected by all. In an unprecedented move, Hippolyta forged alliances with the mysterious Moors, a group long estranged from the wildling tribes, proving her political acumen and establishing her tribe's dominance. In the north, another tale of love and power unfolded. Mandos, a being of the underworld and mysteries, fell for the fierce and noble Moira Stark, sister of the king in the north, Torrhen Stark. Their union was one that defied the bounds of mortality, as their love seemed to bridge the realms of the living and the dead. Moira gave birth to a son named Zagreus, a child born with the dark allure of the underworld coursing through his veins. Known as the Prince of the Underworld, Zagreus grew up surrounded by the cold winds of the north and the eerie whispers of a world beyond death. His destiny, like that of his father, was shrouded in shadow, and the realms above and below would tremble as his power came into its own. While all this was happening, Merlin stood in the heart of his ancient workshop, a cavernous chamber dimly lit by the glow of arcane symbols etched into the stone walls. His fingers moved with deliberate precision, weaving a delicate thread of magic and machinery together. Before him, suspended in the air by thin chains, was his latest creation, gleaming with metallic musculature and sleek, almost skeletal lines. The figure hung like a dormant titan, its form both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Suddenly, a soft hum filled the room as Merlin infused it with life. The puppet's chest slowly expanded, simulating breath, its movements unnervingly organic despite the cold metal that made up its body. When its eyes flickered open, pools of golden light, they glowed with an intelligence far beyond mere programming. The puppet's metallic frame was reinforced with an endoskeleton designed for war, yet Merlin had given it something deeper, a strange mimicry of life. When cut, they bled, a viscous crimson substance oozed from their wounds, as if defying their artificial origin. It was more than just a machine, it could feel, react, even love. He stepped back, gazing at his work, his brow furrowed. His thoughts drifted toward his wife, whose gentle smile had been his guiding light through many lifetimes, and his adopted sons, who he had sworn to protect. A storm was coming, one that would stretch far beyond the borders of the known world. Merlin knew that he couldn't always be there to shield them. His eyes narrowed as he whispered a spell, sealing the puppet's core with an intricate layer of protection. "Soon," he murmured, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I'll leave for ET. But they will be safe." The puppet stirred, flexing its metallic limbs with a soft groan, as if waking from a long slumber. Its gaze locked onto Merlin, a silent sentinel ready to serve. No need for breathing gear, no fear of the vacuum of space, it could withstand what most living beings could not. Blood vessels would burst, lungs would collapse, but not this creation. And yet, as it looked at him, Merlin could sense something stirring within it, something more than just obedience. A glimmer of emotion, perhaps. Was it loyalty, or was it something deeper, something almost human? He could not tell. But that was the point. The puppet wasn't just a machine of war. It was a companion, a protector, one capable of forming bonds, even love, with those it was sworn to protect. The project was complete, but its purpose was just beginning. This was an idea from Eternals and Joy of Life Wuju or one of the Eternals. Chapter 102, Notice. Chapter 103, Chapter 89. Under the steady glow of the twilight, Wuju stood silently in the training ground, his figure still and focused. The quiet breeze stirred his long robes, but his eyes remained fixed on the sword in his hand, an elegant, unadorned blade. Each movement he made was deliberate, controlled, and imbued with the grace of a seasoned warrior. Every muscle moved in harmony with his breath, his body an extension of the sword itself. With a subtle shift in his stance, Wuju began to practice, his blade cutting through the air in swift, graceful arcs. Each swing of his sword was precise, as if drawing invisible lines in the air, embodying the perfect balance of force and fluidity. His movements were as silent as they were lethal, every stroke containing both the finesse of a master and the lethality of a killer. Suddenly, the sword hummed, the air around it shimmering faintly. As Wuju switched stances for another strike, the gift Merlin had bestowed upon him began to stir deep within. A glow ignited in his eyes as his martial abilities from the Zhongwu world awakened. He swung the sword again, this time more forceful, and in that instant, multiple translucent and invisible blades of energy materialized around him. They hovered in the air like phantom apparitions, barely perceptible but radiating immense power. The blades circled him briefly, responding to his chi and will. Their edges gleamed faintly, rippling like the surface of still water disturbed by the lightest touch. It was as if Wuju's mastery of the sword had surpassed the physical realm, his swings now commanding the very essence of energy itself. With one final shift in his stance, Wuju's gaze fell on a training dummy standing several paces away. Without hesitation, he swung the sword again, directing the translucent energy blades toward it. In a flash, the invisible forces shot forward, moving so swiftly that they seemed to vanish from sight. The moment the blades reached the dummy, they pierced and cut through it effortlessly. The wooden structure stood still for a heartbeat, as if untouched by the assault. Then, with a soft creaking sound, the dummy fell apart, its pieces scattering across the ground, cleanly sliced and pierced by the energy blades. Wuju lowered his sword, his expression calm but focused. The air around him settled, the translucent blades dissipating like mist in the wind. Merlin stood, a subtle smile curling on his lips. His eyes, brimming with ancient wisdom, watched Wuju's effortless display of mastery with quiet satisfaction. Cassandra, Jadaka, and Dastan stood nearby, captivated by the performance. The glow of the translucent energy blades still lingered in the air like afterimages, fading slowly as Wuju's sword came to rest. Jadaka and Dastan, both warriors in their own right, were transfixed. They had their own weapons, the powerful astras, but what they witnessed went beyond the physical, it was art. The grace with which Wu Zhu wielded his sword seemed otherworldly. Daston's voice broke the silence. "He looks like he's dancing," he whispered, awe thick in his tone, like a dancer in perfect harmony with his blade. Njidaka's eyes narrowed, his expression more focused. "More like a dance of death," he muttered. There was no missing the lethal precision in each of Wu Zhu's strikes. Cassandra, standing beside Merlin, was speechless. Her gaze lingered on Wu Zhu, still processing what she had seen. "I still can't believe, he's a puppet you created," she whispered, wonder and disbelief mingling in her voice. Merlin's smile widened slightly, his voice warm yet filled with purpose. "Don't think of him as just a puppet, Cassandra. He feels emotions, just like us." The statement hung in the air for a moment. Cassandra turned to her husband, her eyes wide in awe at the complexity of what he had created. Njidaka and Daston, though still watching Wu Zhu, exchanged curious glances, their interest deepening. A flicker of excitement crossed Daston's face as he turned toward Merlin. "Father," he asked, voice filled with anticipation, "can you teach us some of those techniques?" Njidaka's eyes flicked toward Merlin as well, his usual calm demeanor cracked slightly by a glimmer of hope. He stood silent but expectant, his body tense with the possibility of learning something greater. Merlin's face softened, his gaze thoughtful as he considered the request. He could give them the techniques, the power. But this world was not yet accustomed to such arts, martial techniques from the Zhongwu world. He knew that their progress would be limited, perhaps reaching only as far as the Vajra mortal realm or free earth realm. But to go beyond that, it was unlikely. Still, he could see the eagerness in his son's eyes. With a quiet sigh, Merlin nodded slowly, his voice heavy with consideration. "I will think about it." A ripple of excitement passed through both Njidaka and Daston, the hope that they might soon be training in such advanced skills lighting their expressions. Their futures seemed bound by the secrets their father held, an ancient knowledge just beyond their grasp. Merlin turned toward Cassandra, his voice lowering to a gentle whisper as he confided in her. "I created him to protect you." Cassandra blinked, her expression softening. She looked up at her husband, who now smiled faintly at her, his features touched with the tenderness of a man who had seen too many lifetimes. "Balthazar, Isis, Daston, and Njidaka won't always be by your side," he said softly, "so I created this, as a small protection for you." Her fingers found his, their hands entwining in the quiet moment. She held him close, a warmth spreading through her as a sudden vision came over her, a brief glimpse of her future. A son. She could see it clearly, a child born to them, his fate entwined with theirs. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, "I'm going to have a son." Merlin's gaze snapped to her, and in that instant, he enveloped her in a tight embrace, his smile widening with joy. "I'm really happy," he murmured softly, his voice thick with emotion, the future unfolding before them in ways neither could have imagined. A/N, Cassandra's son will be Dune movie Paul Atreides. Also next wife is Lin Mei from The Great Wall, she is from E.T. and her son will be Jing Yuan from Star Rail. Chapter 104, Chapter 90. 5 years passed like the fleeting whisper of wind. In the courtyard of a grand, stone-hewn castle, sunlight cascaded through the canopy, dappling the ground with golden patches. Laughter echoed in the air as a young boy, Paul Emrys, darted around, his small hand sparking with faint tendrils of magic, his magical powers he heard from his father and the ability to see the past and future from his mother. Cassandra stood on the balcony, her gown flowing like ripples in the wind, eyes glimmering with pride. Beside her, Merlin watched intently. "He has same curious look as yours," Cassandra mused, her voice soft like a breeze. "And he looks and behaves just like you," Merlin responded, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Below, Wu Zhu, clad in dark, intricate robes, stood at the edge of the courtyard, ever vigilant, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the precision of a hawk. Though hidden in shadow, his presence was unmistakable, a silent guardian ensuring the boy's safety. Paul's laughter rang out again as he waved his hand, summoning a flock of birds that scattered into the air, their wings glittering like shards of glass against the sun. The world felt alive around him, bending and shifting to his whims. In that moment, Merlin's heart stirred. The future was unfolding before him, bright, unpredictable, and filled with the potential of a boy who held the power of two worlds in his small hands. Paul, come on, Merlin called out, his voice carrying over the courtyard. We must go to Westeros. Paul turned, his innocent face beaming with excitement, and sprinted toward his parents. The boy's energy seemed to light up the air around him, a spark of life wherever his feet touched the ground. Merlin, with a flick of his hand, conjured a swirling portal of shimmering light, its edges crackling with raw magical power. Cassandra placed a hand on Merlin's arm as they all stepped into the vortex. The north of Westeros greeted them with a cold, biting wind. Snow drifted from the heavens, blanketing the ancient halls of Winterfell in a sea of white. The Starks, Torrhen and his family, welcomed them with the somber warmth of northern lords. Yet Merlin's mind was elsewhere, his gaze distant as they dined, exchanged pleasantries, and made their way through the evening's festivities. They soon made their way to King's Landing. It was Aenys's name day, and the great hall was filled with celebration. Laughter echoed off the stone walls, fires crackled in towering hearths, and the scent of roasted meat filled the air. Paul, with the charm only a child could possess, had drawn Aenys and Maegor into his orbit. The three boys played, laughter spilling from their lips as they ran through the feast, chasing one another beneath the towering banners of dire wolves and dragons. Merlin watched them closely, his brow furrowed in contemplation. Maegor, the boy whose destiny was marred by bloodshed and the cruelty of power, seemed at ease, even tugging a small smile as he shared in the joy of the night. Yet Merlin knew too well how the pages of history would turn. Maegor. Merlin whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the revelry. You loved your family once. Your brother. But you will never love his children. His mind flashed with visions, Maegor's cold, unyielding expression as he claimed Balerion, the Black Dread, without shedding a tear for his father's death. The boy before him, innocent now, was destined to become a tyrant, wielding power with an iron fist, relentless in his disdain for the faith of the Seven. But what if this moment could change that? Merlin's heart wrestled with the knowledge of the future. Could Maegor, given this rare opportunity, take a different path? The boy's smile was genuine, he was not yet the monster the history books would record. Merlin's eyes gleamed with determination, knowing the weight of what lay before him. Let's see if destiny can be rewritten, Merlin murmured to himself, his gaze locked on the boy who would soon be known as Maegor the Cruel. While time passed quickly, Paul grew up around Torrhen Stark, Lorik Dane Martell, Mern Gardner, and Targaryen's children. Chapter 105, Paul and Cassandra. The opulent room, bathed in the soft, golden light of the morning sun, overlooked a vast valley stretching into the horizon. The castle of Karth seemed to glisten under the sun's touch, its walls adorned with intricate tapestries and shimmering crystal glassware. Lady Cassandra, regal at 45 but possessing a timeless beauty, sat at a grand table laden with an exquisite array of food, yet her gaze was distant, fixed on the breathtaking valley below. Her dark hair, and her face, untouched by time, held the poise of someone who had seen and commanded much. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly across the room. Mother. Paul's voice was soft but carried the weight of a son seeking his mother's attention. He entered the room with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to power but not yet fully wielding it. His lean, wiry frame cut a striking figure as he moved with a subtle intensity, his black hair falling in tousled waves around his sharp, angular face. His hazel eyes, vivid, like molten amber, shifted between curiosity and contemplation, glimmering under the sunlight that spilled through the tall windows. He was a young man burdened with destiny, yet in this moment, he was simply her son. Cassandra turned from the valley view and watched him approach, her lips curving into a soft, knowing smile as he took his place at the far end of the table, piling food onto his plate without a word. The clinking of silverware and the quiet hum of the morning filled the space between them. It's good you're up early, Cassandra said, her voice serene yet carrying the authority of a matriarch. Your father wants to see you before he leaves for Westeros. Paul's brows furrowed, his gaze darkening as he paused, the tension in the air sharpening. He's leaving. His voice carried a trace of disappointment, though he masked it well. He had hoped to spend more time with his father, learning the intricacies of magic and their family's legacy. Cassandra nodded, her smile faint but reassuring. He's going to meet with the Targaryens, to discuss the matter of the next heir. Paul slumped back slightly in his seat, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. The heaviness of his father's duties always weighed on him, pulling his father away from the lessons Paul craved. He leaned forward, the tension visible in his posture as he asked, will he come back right away? Cassandra, ever composed, poured a glass of water for her son, her hands moving with elegant precision. A smile touched her lips as she replied, "Don't worry, your father won't be gone for long." She paused, letting the weight of her words linger before adding, "I've also spoken to him about taking you with him to E.T." Paul couldn't suppress the smile that tugged at his lips. E.T., exotic, distant, full of the ancient magic he longed to study. His mother always seemed 2 steps ahead, knowing his desires before he voiced them. Cassandra placed the glass of water just before her, her gaze sharpening. Paul reached out casually, expecting her to pass it to him, but she left it where it sat. "I just woke up, Mother. Can I please?" Paul began, his voice tinged with weariness. Cassandra's smile faded as she shook her head. "If you want it, make me give it to you. Use the voice. I want to see how far you've progressed." Her tone was calm but carried the unmistakable command of a teacher expecting more from her student. A sigh escaped Paul. He slumped back, exasperated. "This again?" He rolled his eyes, then shrugged in defeat, lifting his chin in mock bravado. In a half-hearted, growly impression of a wizard, he intoned, "Give me the water." Cassandra's face remained impassive, not even a flicker of amusement. She was testing him, and she wasn't one to relent easily. Paul groaned inwardly, resigned. He straightened in his chair, collected himself, and stared at the glass. His voice lowered, more serious but still lacking the force necessary. He said, evenly, "Give me the water." Nothing. The silence that followed was almost mocking. He raised his hands in defeat. "I tried," he muttered. Cassandra's expression hardened, a flash of impatience in her eyes. "The glass can't hear you. Command me star dot." Her voice carried a weight now, a gravity that sent a ripple of tension through the room. Paul felt it, a shift in the air, a demand for focus. His mother's words were a challenge, and the authority in them shook him out of his complacency. Paul straightened in his chair, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his chest rising and falling as if drawing power from the very air around him. His eyes fluttered closed, and for an instant, the room seemed to shift. The quiet clink of cutlery and the soft breeze through the open window faded, replaced by an almost unnatural stillness. He reached deep within himself, searching for the primal force lying dormant, waiting to be unleashed. When Paul opened his eyes, they were no longer merely hazel. They gleamed, focused with a laser-like intensity, locking onto Cassandra as if the world had narrowed down to this singular moment. His voice, calm but edged with authority, pierced the silence. "Give me the water." His words struck the air like a shockwave. The very sound rippled through the room, folding in on itself with an echoing, otherworldly reverberation. His voice was no longer human, it became a force, layered with whispers that seemed to come from every corner of the room. Paul's voice was no longer his own. It stretched, deepened, and multiplied, layered upon itself, as if Paul's or Cassandra's voice is distorted, stretched and deepened, with an unnatural echo that makes it sound as though multiple versions of the speaker are issuing the command simultaneously. The voice becomes guttural, almost inhuman, vibrating with layers of reverberation that ripple outward. It doesn't just sound like a voice coming from one mouth, but as though it has traveled through dimensions, past and future versions of the speaker converging into one terrifying, singular command. Across the table, Cassandra's body reacted before her mind could resist. Her hand twitched, her fingers curling around the delicate glass before she even realized it. Her eyes widened slightly, watching her own betrayal as her hand lifted the glass, slowly moving it toward Paul. Her mind fought against the compulsion, straining to break free, but the voice held her firmly in its grip. The glass hovered in midair, inches from Paul's reach. A battle played out in her gaze, her will clashing against the weight of his command. Sweat beaded lightly on her brow as she strained, and for a brief moment, Paul thought he had done it. But then she stopped. Her hand, trembling slightly, lowered the glass back down onto the table with deliberate calm. Cassandra exhaled softly, her control reasserted, though her expression softened into something warmer, something proud. Cassandra's voice, low and approving, broke the silence that hung in the air. "Better." Paul frowned, the thrill of his near success dimming in the face of her measured reaction. "Better," he repeated, the dissatisfaction clear in his voice. In one quick motion, he leaned far across the table, his arm stretching out as he snatched the glass himself, his brow furrowing with quiet frustration. The power of the voice was there, he had felt it, tasted it. But it hadn't been enough to fully break her. Not yet. Chapter 106, Chapter 91. Paul soon entered the library. As high as the walls rose, so it seemed did the rows of books that encircled a winding staircase in the middle of the large chamber. They lined what felt like every inch of the curving stone wall, shelf after shelf, tome upon tome, boxes innumerable filled with scrolls, every last one of them. Paul knew, rare and precious and most likely unique. There were so many of them that ladders had been erected connecting to a reading terrace above them, which was also filled with books. And, as if books in shelves or on a terrace were not sufficiently excessive, there were stacks of books as tall as Paul himself scattered about the floor. The knowledge that lay within them could never be absorbed by a single person in his or her lifetime. Paul stepped into the heart of the library, his boots softly tapping on the polished marble floor, a faint echo bouncing off the high ceilings. The space opened up around him, vast and airy, with a cathedral-like reverence. Alcoves carved into the stone walls bore the sacred symbol of Eru, each one intricately engraved, glowing faintly with an ancient light. Between them, stained glass windows stretched tall, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the floor. The shifting light filtered through the panes, mixing with the soft illumination from the room's central masterpiece, the Merlin font. In the center of the room, the font simmered like a living entity, a cauldron of unfathomable power. Pale blue mist coiled lazily above it, occasionally spitting up ethereal sprays of energy that danced in the air before vanishing. The mist curled upward, spreading like tendrils, thick with the scent of ozone and the hum of raw magic. The pool beneath it shimmered, a swirling vortex of magical energy so potent, Paul instinctively felt its pull in his bones, a force he preferred not to dwell on. This place, this font, was where magic lived and breathed, and the magnitude of it was overwhelming, even for him. It was magical liquid created by his father, it was created with help of melange and other magical plants, it awakens magical talent and even old bloodline powers. Paul's eyes traveled upward, and there, above the font, was Merlin, floating, levitating in a meditative trance. His robes billowed gently as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist, the fabric flowing around him like liquid starlight. His father's presence was commanding, the very air around him vibrating with ancient power. Merlin, a man of endless knowledge, a master of not just magic, but the arts of crafting, medicine, and countless fields unknown to most. Even after all these years, Paul still felt a flicker of awe when he looked at him. For a moment, Paul hesitated, not wanting to disturb the serenity of the moment. The room felt sacred, the kind of quiet that made every breath significant, every step sacred. But he gathered his courage, his voice soft but steady. "Father, I am here." Merlin's eyes opened slowly, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the room itself exhaled with him. His gaze met Paul's, warm and wise, as if he had expected his son all along. A smile broke across his lips, the kind that carried years of understanding. Without a word, Merlin's body began to descend, drifting gracefully away from the font, the shimmering mist parting for him like water. His robes trailed lightly in the air as he lowered, his feet gently touching the ground in front of Paul. The landing was so effortless it seemed otherworldly, as though gravity was merely a suggestion to him. Standing before his son, Merlin placed a hand on Paul's shoulder, his touch firm but comforting, the weight of his power balanced by the warmth of his fatherly affection. "Paul," he said, his voice a rich, deep melody that resonated through the chamber, "you've come at the perfect time." Paul's curiosity stirred as Merlin's voice, deep and measured, broke the silence between them. "I am leaving for Westeros soon," Merlin began, his eyes focused, yet gentle. "I know this is your first time managing the city alone, but I want you to know, you are not without support. Balthazar, Dastan, and Jadaka will be by your side. If anything goes wrong, they'll be there." Paul smiled, the reassurance calming his nerves, and he nodded. Though the weight of responsibility was heavy, knowing those trusted figures would stand with him was a comfort. He then asked, "Father, what about your plan to travel to ET?" Merlin's gaze shifted, thoughtful, as he considered his response. The golden light from the stained glass windows reflected off his features, making him seem even more ethereal. "I plan to journey there later," Merlin said, his voice steady, but layered with the complexity of his thoughts. "But Aegon, your uncle, he is thinking of choosing an heir, although he will rule for probably another decade, but still he asked for my help." Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya had long passed the half-century mark, yet their appearance defied the years. Despite being over 50, they retained the vitality and appearance of those in their prime, their faces smooth, their movements as graceful as ever. The secret behind their youthful appearance was Mélange Mixtel, potion created by Merlin. Paul nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Uncle Aegon with Aunt Visenya and Aunt Rhaenys' help was considered a wise ruler, but with his impending departure, the kingdom was entering dangerous territory. Both heirs to the throne, Aenys and Maegor, were less than ideal. Aenys, with his gentle, indecisive nature, was ill-suited to lead a land filled with power struggles. Even though Targaryens had dragons, they are. Maegor, on the other hand, was a force of stubbornness and iron will, too rigid to bend when needed. The realm required balance, something neither of them could easily provide. It made perfect sense why Aegon would seek Merlin's counsel. Merlin's smile returned, this time with a warmth only a father could offer. He placed a hand on Paul's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "I know you want to come with me to E.T., Merlin said, his voice softening, "and we will discuss that when I return. But for now, focus on your duties here. Westeros needs my attention, but this city, our people, need yours." The air around them seemed to hum with the magic of the moment, the weight of responsibility settling over Paul like a mantle. He could feel the unspoken trust Merlin placed in him, and it filled him with both pride and a sense of quiet determination. The flicker of excitement about E.T. was still there, but now tempered by the understanding that his father had more immediate concerns. Merlin stepped back, the light casting a halo around him as he prepared to leave. The world outside the library seemed distant, as if all of reality had faded to leave only the two of them in this moment of connection. Paul watched his father, admiring the ease with which Merlin navigated the pressures of leadership, magic, and family. "When you return," Paul said, smiling, "we'll talk more about E.T." Merlin nodded, the twinkle of anticipation in his eyes matching his son's. "Indeed we will," he replied. Merlin smiled at his son and said, "I know you want to come with me to E.T., we will discuss about this when I return." While in Westeros, Aenys married Alyssa Valyrian and had 6 children: Rhaena, Aegon II Targaryen, Viserys I Targaryen, Jaehaerys I Targaryen, Alysanne Targaryen, and Viola Targaryen. While Maegor Targaryen had been wed to Cerys Hightower since 25 AC, yet by 39 AC, their marriage had failed to produce an heir. The absence of children gnawed at him, a wound to his pride and a threat to his legacy. Whispers began to spread throughout the realm, fueling his frustration and suspicions. Seeking to secure his bloodline, Maegor set his sights on Alyce Harroway. She was the daughter of Lord Lucas Harroway of Harrenhal, known for her beauty and youth. The marriage caused immediate outrage within the faith of the Seven, for polygamy was forbidden, and Maegor had violated his sacred vows to Cerys. But Maegor was unbothered. He consulted the healers of the Temple of Ulmo. After their examination, Maegor was assured that he was in perfect health, his virility beyond question. This confirmation gave Maegor the justification he needed to blame Cerys entirely. The faith's discontent was swiftly met with ridicule. After all, can anyone blame Maegor for wanting to have children? He moved forward with his plans, taking Alyce Harroway as his second wife in a grand Valyrian ritual, full of fire and blood. Chapter 107, Chapter 92. The Targaryens enjoyed a stable reign over Westeros, their power unshaken, yet the challenges ahead loomed in the form of Aegon's children. Maegor, though as skilled as his father with a sword, had shown signs of cruelty from a young age. His lack of empathy extended to all except his immediate family, his mother, father, brother, and sister. This darkness troubled Aegon, especially as his son grew older. As the years passed, Aegon began to step back from taking the potions infused with Mélange, allowing age to slowly catch up with him. The same was true for his wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, who too had let the effects of the substance fade. Despite this, their reign remained strong, built on healthy relationships with powerful houses like the Starks and the Gardeners, as well as their alliances with Merlin, a trusted friend and advisor. Merlin's influence extended beyond Westeros, and his wisdom was invaluable, but he often came and went from the Targaryen court on his mysterious travels. In King's Landing, Aegon sat uncomfortably, his back being treated for the cuts he had sustained from the Iron Throne's jagged edges. Merlin stood nearby, chuckling softly. "I warned you," Merlin said with amusement. "A throne made of swords might look imposing, but sitting on it, not so much." Aegon winced, managing a half-smile. Yes, I thought it was a brilliant idea back then. Now, not so much. Rhaenys and Visenya exchanged amused glances, watching their husband's discomfort. Merlin smiled before adding, I'll be heading to ET soon. But the timing is a bit complicated. There's an issue I need to deal with. Rhaenys, always keen on maintaining ties and connections, raised an eyebrow. If you're leaving for some time, why not send Paul and Cassandra here? Lena's been asking about Paul a lot recently. Lena Targaryen, a deviation from the original timeline of succession, was the youngest child of Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya. She was the apple of their eyes, cherished by both parents. Merlin knew that Lena and Paul were close, and the bond between them was undeniable. Aegon had even confided in Merlin that if not for the delicate political situation with the Faith of the Seven, he would have named Lena his heir. She had the sharp mind of Visenya and the eloquence of Rhaenys, making her a strong candidate for the throne, a fact that troubled Aegon as his sons showed more flaws with each passing year. Aegon and Rhaenys nodded, their eyes softening at the mention of their grandson. They were eager to see Paul again, but as Aegon shifted the conversation, his expression grew more serious. How are Maegor and Rhaenys? Aegon asked, his voice carrying the weight of a father grappling with the future of his dynasty. All three shared a glance, their faces falling into solemn expressions. Aegon sighed, breaking the silence. Rhaenys is the same, kind-hearted, courteous, always wanting to be loved. He tries so hard to please everyone, but in doing so, he leaves himself vulnerable. Rhaenys nodded, her voice gentle but laced with concern. He makes friends easily, but he's too trusting. He lets others influence him far too much, and while he dreams of a peaceful, prosperous realm, his idealism blinds him to the realities of ruling. Visenya, always the more pragmatic of the three, spoke with a mix of pride and sadness. Maegor, on the other hand, was born for war. His skill with weapons is unmatched. He thrives in battle, and his reputation as one of the finest knights of his time is well earned. She paused, her voice lowering. But, his strength comes at a cost. He is hard, brutal at times, too often, he takes things too far. Aegon's expression darkened as he nodded in agreement. Maegor is quarrelsome, quick to anger, slow to forgive. His temper is dangerous, and while that might serve him well in battle, it's not the temperament of a ruler. He's rigid, unyielding. And that's not good for the crown. Rhaenys exhaled, the weight of their dilemma heavy on her shoulders. We've talked about this many times, but it feels no easier. Letting Maegor take the crown would be dangerous. His loyalty lies with us, his family, and maybe Merlin, but to the realm. Beyond that, he's cold, distant. He lacks the empathy a king needs. The rules of succession had changed, thanks to the wise counsel of Merlin, which allowed for the throne to pass based on merit, not merely birth order. While the realm had accepted this change, it had given Maegor the belief that he had a chance to rule. And that was what troubled his parents the most. Though Maegor was loyal to them, they could see the seeds of madness in him, and the fear of him becoming a tyrant was real. Rhaenys glanced at Visenya, whose sad smile reflected the quiet pain only a mother could feel. No mother wanted to admit that her son might not be fit to rule. Merlin, ever the voice of reason, spoke up. I know Maegor is fiercely loyal to you, his mother, his father, his brother, and even to me and my family. But beyond that, his emotional connections are limited. Visenya's gaze dropped to her hands, her voice almost a whisper. Yes. He doesn't have any real friends beyond Paul. He's not close to his nephews or anyone else, really. For years, Visenya had tried to temper Maegor's aggression, to guide him towards a path of balance, but it seemed her efforts were in vain. The wildness in him was like a fire, untamed and unpredictable. She feared what the future might hold, especially the possibility of rebellion once Rhaenys was king. The survival of Rhaenys had altered the course of history. In another timeline, Aegon and Visenya's relationship had been strained by grief after Rhaenys' death. Aegon had mourned deeply, and Visenya had grown distant, fixated on Maegor's claim to the throne. In that version of history, she had supported Maegor's usurpation, unable or unwilling to see his faults. But in this reality, the three of them were united, their bond stronger, and they recognized the signs of danger in Maegor. Visenya, though pained by it, saw her son for what he was, and she feared what might happen if he ever wore the crown. Merlin, sensing their inner turmoil, offered a solution. It would be best for Aenys to take the throne, with Maegor as his hand. Together, they balance each other, Aenys with his kindness and Maegor with his strength. One would temper the other's flaws. Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya exchanged looks, each contemplating the wisdom of Merlin's words. It was a compromise, but one that might prevent disaster. Yes, Aegon said quietly. That may be the only way forward. Rhaenys nodded in agreement, while Visenya, though still sorrowful, accepted the truth. The Targaryen legacy would survive, but only if they navigated these dangerous waters carefully. And for that, they would need both of their sons, working together, not against one another. What they didn't know was Maegor wouldn't rebel or usurp his nephew. Because of Merlin and Paul's influence, he was not into the idea of kinslaying to get the crown. And felt a rebellion will only cause the Targaryen dynasty to suffer. Chapter 108, Chapter 93. Aegon had recently named Aenys as his heir. While Maegor was visibly disappointed, he agreed to support his brother as hand. Now, Aegon sat with his wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, opposite Aenys and Maegor in a dimly lit hall. Merlin observed the family from a distance, silently assessing the scene. Neither Aenys nor Maegor could fully process the weight of their parents' decision. Breaking the silence, Maegor frowned and asked bluntly, "So, you're truly naming him the heir?" Aegon met Maegor's gaze, sensing his frustration, and sighed. "Maegor, you're a talented warrior, and your governing skills are beyond question, traits you inherited from your mother." He paused as Maegor leaned in, absorbing every word. "But you are also unyielding and often unforgiving. In times of chaos, these qualities are invaluable for a ruler. Yet, in a time of peace, they can bring challenges we may not withstand." Maegor muttered under his breath, "We have dragons." Aegon smiled knowingly. "Yes, we have dragons. But that doesn't make us immortal, Maegor. A dragon's flame can protect us in battle, but we are still vulnerable. Poison, betrayal, or even a skilled assassin, these can bring down even the mightiest dragon lords." Maegor's frown deepened, and he nodded slightly, understanding the weight of his father's caution. As Maegor processed his father's words carefully, as Visenya added, "Son, we understand your disappointment. But we aren't saying Aenys is perfect. He has his weaknesses too, soft-hearted, easily swayed, and sometimes hesitant to make decisive choices. That's why your father suggested you serve together, so each of you can cover the other's blind spots." Aenys nodded at his mother's words, accepting her assessment without offense, aware of the truth in her observations. Then Rhaenys spoke gently, "And Maegor, know this, your children will have their own chance to ascend the throne in time." This was a compromise Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya had settled on, hoping it would ease Maegor's disappointment without undermining Aenys' future rule. Both Aenys and Maegor murmured their agreement. Maegor was okay with helping his brother manage the throne. Aegon watched his sons, pride softening his expression, and said, "My sons, I feel my death nearing. I've stopped taking the melange potion, and this will likely be my last request of you both. Support each other. Together, bring the Targaryen dynasty to new heights." The realization of Aegon's decision to forego the life-sustaining potion weighed heavily on them. Yet, they also took comfort in their shared belief that death was not an end but a step toward a greater reunion. 8 years after Aegon Targaryen named Aenys his heir, he would pass away peacefully in his sleep, followed by his beloved Rhaenys 2 years later, who was heartbroken. Aegon awoke, feeling strangely light and unburdened. He rose, noticing his surroundings were different from his earthly chambers. Suddenly, a swirling cloud of sand appeared before him, and from it emerged Anubis, the ancient god of death, veiled in a mystical cocoon of Egyptian sands. The god's arrival was seamless, like a desert storm materializing and vanishing at will. In awe, Aegon whispered, "Lord Anubis." Anubis spoke in a voice like a calm river, flowing with authority. "Your time has come, Aegon Targaryen." Following the deity's gesture, Aegon turned to see his lifeless form lying on the bed behind him. Although he had known this day was inevitable, the sight of his own body struck him with a strange, hollow reverence. "That is me," he murmured. Anubis inclined his head. "That is you. Soon, your family will come to find you, and they will honor your memory with a proper Valyrian farewell." Aegon nodded, feeling a mix of sorrow and acceptance. Anubis continued, "Fear not. You will see them again, in time. "Let me see them once more, even if from afar," Aegon requested, his voice heavy with longing. Anubis granted his wish, and with a subtle wave, they were transported to where Visenya, Rhaenys, Aenys, Maegor, and Aegon's grandchildren were gathered. Aegon watched them in silence, the sight filling his heart with pride and peace. Tears welled up as he accepted his journey's end, taking in this final, bittersweet moment. As Anubis snapped his fingers, they descended in a cocoon of swirling sand, vanishing into the earth, leaving behind only memories and a legacy for future generations. 2 years after Aegon's death, Rhaenys passed away. Visenya chose to continue consuming melange to look after the family. Aenys ascended the throne as King Aenys I Targaryen. Admitting to all assembled at Aegon I's funeral pyre that he was not nearly the warrior his half-brother was, Aenys presented Maegor with Aegon's Valyrian steel blade, Blackfire, proclaiming they would rule together. After Aegon I's death, to make sure Aenys and Visenya told Maegor to claim Balerion, his father's mount, who accepted Maegor. Shortly after Aenys' ascension to the throne, several rebellions broke out. In the Vale of Arryn, Jonos Arryn rose against his brother, Lord Ronald, imprisoning him and his family. Although he arrived too late to rescue Lord Ronald, Maegor personally crushed this rebellion, flying on Balerion to the Eyrie. Hoping Maegor would show them mercy, Jonos's followers threw Jonos through the moon door. Nonetheless, Maegor had all of them hang. To replace Lord Alan Stokeworth, who had died fighting another rebel, King Aenys I named Maegor as his new hand of the king to reward him for his service, an office Maegor held for continuous years. Tragedy soon struck House Targaryen. The Faith of the Seven, with the secretive aid of the Citadel, sought vengeance against Maegor for the disdain he had shown them, especially after he humiliated their influence by taking Alyssa Haraway as his second wife without their blessing. They were also angry at King Aenys for ignoring them. To strike at the Targaryens' heart, the Faith sent assassins to kill King Aenys. Their plan succeeded, but fortune was not entirely in their favor, for Aenys' sons, Prince Aegon and Prince Viserys Targaryen, were visiting their father at the time. The assassins were discovered before they could make their escape, but in the ensuing struggle, they managed to take the lives of Aegon and Viserys as well, leaving the family shattered by a ruthless and calculated attack. This ruthless act of treachery set the stage for a new and bloodier chapter in the Targaryen reign. Chapter 109, Chapter 94. Merlin stepped into the somber hall, his gaze falling upon Alyssa Valerion, who knelt on the cold stone floor with her children, Rhaena, Jaehaerys, Alysanne, and Viola Targaryen. They clustered around the lifeless forms of Aenys, Viserys, and Aegon, grief weighing heavily in the air, as if time itself had stopped in mourning. Alyssa's face was pale but resolute, her arms protectively draped around her children, each lost in their own hollow-eyed sorrow. Beside Merlin stood Maegor, silent but seething, and Visenya, her sharp gaze tinged with sorrow. Maegor's voice cut through the silence, taut with barely restrained rage. "We captured the assassin alive. I've tried every method I know, every manner of pain, but the coward refuses to speak of who sent him." Even as he spoke, Merlin could feel the bitterness of Maegor's anger, cold, smoldering, and unyielding. Visenya's gaze softened as she looked to Merlin, a glimmer of hope mingling with despair. Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with a fragile hope. "Can you make him talk with magic?" Merlin met her eyes and gave a solemn nod. "I have ways to unravel his mind. Lead me to him." Maegor inclined his head, turning on his heel. As they began to move toward the dungeons, Rhaena's voice cut through the silence. "I'm coming too." Maegor stopped, eyeing his niece with a mix of surprise and hesitation. Merlin caught his gaze and gave a subtle nod of approval. After a beat, Maegor yielded, and they continued in a somber procession, with Visenya and Alyssa quietly joining them. As they descended the winding stone steps, the torches cast flickering shadows against the cold walls, casting an eerie light on their solemn faces. Merlin's eyes flicked over the group, and he noted the intensity in young Jaehaerys' gaze as he stared at Maegor, his jaw clenched. Merlin recognized the look, it was one of silent accusation, a blame that had already taken root. "So, Jaehaerys already suspects Maegor," Merlin mused. "The boy has drawn his conclusions, whether Maegor has changed or not." The dungeon door loomed ahead, and Merlin felt the tension in the air thicken as they approached, each step closer to the truth awaiting them in the shadows. As they reached the dungeons, thick iron doors creaked open, revealing the dimly lit corridor beyond. Guarding the entrance were Maegor's most loyal men, standing stone-faced and unyielding. Their steely gazes and imposing stances left no doubt, no one had entered or left without Mager's express command. They stepped inside the cell. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of blood and sweat, and the faint glow from a lone torch cast deep shadows on the stone walls. In the center of the room, slumped and barely conscious, was the assassin. His wrists and ankles were bound tightly in iron chains bolted to the walls, his body a patchwork of fresh bruises and open wounds. He was drooling slightly, his head hanging forward, the faint rise and fall of his chest the only sign he was still alive. Merlin took in the sight, his eyes narrowing as he studied the men. Even in his half-dazed state, the assassin's jaw was clenched with a fierce, grim resolve, a silent declaration that he would take his secrets to the grave. Mager's fists tightened as he watched. He's stubborn. No amount of pain seems to break him. Merlin stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. His fingers began to trace an intricate pattern in the air, faint tendrils of magic swirling around his hand. The shadows danced, twisting as the magic took hold, the air around them crackling with a dark energy that felt both ancient and powerful. Then it's time to see what he has in that little mind of his, Merlin murmured, his voice low and foreboding. He glanced back at Rena and the others, his eyes warning them of what was about to happen. The assassin's eyes widened in terror as he recognized the figure before him. He stammered, his voice shaking, "You're Merlin, the wizard." Merlin's gaze held steady, cold and piercing. Without a word, he placed his glowing hand on the assassin's forehead, and the man's muffled scream echoed through the cell, his body convulsing as Merlin sifted through his memories. The flickering torchlight seemed to grow dimmer, the room closing in as Merlin's magic pried open the assassin's mind, peeling back layers of thought and deceit. Fragments of a secret meeting flickered across Merlin's mind, the assassin making a deal in hushed tones, the plan laid out with meticulous care. Merlin saw a conversation in which the assassin was instructed to make Enis's death appear as though it were caused by poison. The final, damning touch was to be Mager's Targaryen bracelet, planted beside Enis's body, meant to cast suspicion on Mager himself. Merlin scowled as he delved deeper. The figure instructing the assassin was not the mastermind but only a messenger. A shadow obscured the true face of the one who orchestrated this, and Merlin sensed it was all designed to protect the real architect, someone who harbored a deep hatred for Mager and the Targaryens as a whole. Merlin withdrew his hand, his eyes hard as steel. The assassin slumped back, gasping for breath, drained and broken. Mager's voice broke the silence. "Did you find anything?" Merlin turned to face the grim assembly. With a steady hand, Merlin gestured into the air, and tendrils of shimmering magic spiraled outward, forming a misty orb that expanded, filling the dark cell with an eerie glow. As he wove his fingers through the air, faint images began to materialize within the swirling mist, shifting and solidifying into scenes from the assassin's memories. Before Mager, Visenya, Alyssa, and young Rena, a darkened chamber appeared, dimly lit by candlelight. The assassin knelt, his head bowed before a cloaked figure, whose face remained concealed in shadow. The murmur of voices echoed, distorted and haunting, as the memory replayed itself in full view. They watched as the figure laid out the plan in cold, calculated words. "Slip poison into Enis's wine, and leave this," a hand extended, revealing Mager's bracelet, glinting ominously in the low light, near his body. "Let it be known that Mager struck him down." Merlin spoke up. This was a deliberate attempt to throw the Targaryens into chaos, a calculated strike designed to incite a war between Mager and Jaehaerys. The assassin was instructed to poison Enis and leave Mager's bracelet at the scene, making it look as though Mager had murdered his own kin. A shocked silence followed, Alyssa and Rena exchanging horrified glances. Mager's jaw clenched, fury radiating from him. Visenya's eyes blazed, but her voice remained steady. "Do you know who's responsible?" Merlin exhaled slowly, his frustration evident. The true puppet master kept themselves hidden, sending intermediaries to contact the assassin. Whoever arranged this will have covered their tracks thoroughly, and those intermediaries are likely already dead. Alyssa's voice cut through the tension, laced with determination. "Can you find them?" Merlin gave her a calm, reassuring nod. "By tomorrow, I will have a lead." Magic leaves traces even in the darkest corners. The gathered Targaryens listened, their resolve hardening. Visenya's face showed unwavering trust, while Mager's fury simmered just below the surface. Rena watched them all, uncertain but taking strength from her mother's belief in Merlin. Chapter 110, Chapter 95. The death of Aenys Targaryen and his sons Aegon and Viserys sent shockwaves across Westeros, plunging the realm into grief and uncertainty. Nobles whispered in the halls, and commoners mourned in the streets, shaken by the sudden loss of their prince and his heirs. But, on Merlin's advice, the capture of the assassin was kept a closely guarded secret. This silence preserved a slim advantage, allowing Merlin and the Targaryens to hunt down those responsible without alerting the true masterminds. While Maegor had made sure to set up guards for his mother, his nieces and nephews. The last, but least, his wife Alice was pregnant and probably going to give birth soon. So he had set up healers and guards with her. The High Septon and other influential members of the Faith of the Seven were taken aback at the news. The deaths had come sooner than they had anticipated. Yet, they were too enraptured by their newfound power and the seeming success of their mission to question it further. Secure in their arrogance, they failed to consider one vital element, Merlin. The wizard's unexpected presence cast a shadow over their schemes, one they hadn't foreseen. Unlike the Faith of the Seven, the Maesters of the Citadel operated in the shadows, their involvement limited but crucial. They had discreetly supplied the Faith with a rare and potent poison, a substance carefully chosen to mimic a natural illness, one that could slip under scrutiny and arouse little suspicion. The Maesters kept their contact with the Faith shrouded in secrecy, minimizing the chance of discovery. They understood the stakes and knew to tread lightly, hoping the Faith's arrogance would shield them from any potential fallout. As Merlin suspected, whispers began spreading through the courts and common folk alike, accusing Maegor of slaying the king and his sons. The rumors seemed almost perfectly crafted, each word laced with subtle accusations aimed at planting doubt and turning allies into enemies. Merlin recognized the cunning behind it. These were no ordinary rumors. They were the seeds of a masterfully orchestrated smear campaign, designed to fracture the Targaryen dynasty from within. Following the trail, Merlin hunted down the intermediaries used by the true conspirators. Yet, as he expected, each one lay dead before he could reach them, silenced with brutal efficiency. Standing over the latest victim, a man named Jacob, Merlin's lips curled into a slight, mirthless smile. Do they really believe death will hide their secrets from me? At the crime scene, Merlin knelt, placing his hand against the cold, blood-stained ground. His magic flared to life, sending spectral figures materializing into the air around him. The shadows danced and shifted, taking form as a vision unfolded, a replay of the moments before Jacob's death. Jacob's face appeared, tense and wary, sensing the imminent danger. 3 hooded figures emerged from the shadows, their movements swift and precise. Jacob's hand darted to his hip, pulling a knife, and he lunged toward the intruders. But they were prepared. One of them twisted aside, striking him in the chest with deadly precision, and another moved in swiftly, slicing Jacob's throat with a cold efficiency. The figures hovered in the vision, spectral yet chillingly clear. As Merlin studied them, his gaze fell upon an insignia carved onto the chest of one of the assassins, a 7-pointed star. His eyes narrowed. Faith militant, Merlin murmured, the words laced with contempt. So, the Faith of the Seven had sent its zealots to tie up loose ends. Merlin stood, brushing off the dirt from his hands, his mind racing. The Faith had grown bold, too bold, believing themselves untouchable. When Merlin returned, he found tragedy had struck once more. Alice Haraway, Maegor's long-suffering wife, had finally gone into labor, only to give birth to a twisted, eyeless monstrosity, a child deformed beyond recognition. She lay pale and trembling, staring at the stillborn baby in horror. Beside her, Maegor and Visenya stood frozen, shock and disbelief etched into their faces. Merlin's gaze fell upon the infant, and he felt an unnatural energy lingering in the air. He murmured to himself, "This is not nature's work. Someone tampered with this child's birth, dark magic, woven into a potion." Maegor, his face a mask of fury, turned to Merlin. "Potion?" Merlin nodded grimly. "I can feel the residue of warlock magic, something from Essos. It's a twisted art, a vile magic used only by those who seek to manipulate life itself." Visenya, her face tightening with rage, immediately summoned the guards and trusted healers. Some healers tended to Alice, whose pale face was streaked with tears, while Visenya interrogated the room with a voice as sharp as steel. "Who brought food to Lady Alice during her pregnancy?" The guards and healers shifted uneasily under the intense scrutiny, and Merlin noticed several of them exchange glances, clearly rattled. Maegor's eyes darkened. "Answer her," he commanded, his voice thick with authority. One of the healers hesitated, then spoke up. It was Lady Alice's attendant. She was among the few allowed by Lord Mazer to attend to her personally. Merlin's expression hardened, and he exchanged a look with Mazer. We need to find her, now. They quickly descended into the dark cellars, where the attendant was found, collapsed in a corner. Blood seeped from a wound, her breath shallow but steady. Merlin knelt beside her, touching her forehead with glowing fingers as he channeled a surge of healing energy. The wound began to close, and slowly, the woman's eyes fluttered open, focusing in terror on the figures of Mazer and Merlin. Mazer's glare bore into her. Merlin, his voice calm but probing, asked, "Did you place anything in Lady Alice's soup?" The attendant shook her head rapidly, fear widening her eyes. "No. I swear, I did nothing. I only brought the soup to her chambers as I always have." Merlin studied her face, sensing no hint of deceit. He nodded slowly. "Did you see anyone unusual in the kitchen at the time?" The attendant thought, her gaze growing distant. "Lady Cerise, she was in the kitchen." Mazer's face twisted with fury as he muttered, "Cerise." The name came out like a curse, his mind already piecing together the betrayal. Merlin's voice was gentle but firm as he continued. "Did you see who attacked you?" The attendant shivered, her brow furrowing in concentration. She shook her head. Merlin reached out, placing a hand over her temple, drawing her memories to the surface. Spectral figures appeared, and the scene unfolded, Cerise, sneaking up from behind, driving a knife into the attendant's back before leaving her to die in the cellar. As the vision faded, Merlin withdrew his hand, his expression grave. It was Cerise, he confirmed, the weight of the revelation settling on everyone in the room. Mazer's hands clenched into fists, his rage barely contained. "She will pay for this," he growled. As Mazer clenched his fists, rage coursing through him, Merlin placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "It's not just Cerise we're dealing with," Merlin cautioned. "The potion that twisted your child into a monstrosity isn't something just anyone could procure. It's an ancient, forbidden substance, carefully guarded by those who practice dark magic. This means there is a far-reaching conspiracy behind her actions, someone powerful enough to pull these strings." Mazer's eyes met Merlin's, filled with a burning need for answers. "So, who is it? Who would dare orchestrate such a thing?" Merlin's expression hardened. "The Faith. I found evidence. The Faith militant killed the intermediaries used to hire the assassin who murdered Aenys, Aegon, and Viserys. They likely manipulated Cerise into slipping that vile potion to Alice, not only to end your bloodline but to weaken you emotionally, drive you to the edge." Mazer's face darkened, his voice rising in anger. "Those bastards will pay." His words echoed through the stone corridors, his wrath palpable. The assassination of King Aenys I and his sons, and the staining of the faith of the Seven. The assassination of King Aenys I Targaryen, along with his sons, Princes Aegon and Viserys, marked one of the most grievous chapters in Westerosi history. The shocking revelation that members of the Faith of the Seven had orchestrated this act of treachery sent ripples of disbelief and outrage throughout the realm. An institution once held in reverence as the moral pillar of Westerosi society was now marred by suspicion and scandal. When the conspiracy came to light, and evidence revealed the Faith's role in these assassinations, the public outcry was fierce. The Faith of the Seven, which had long claimed to uphold the values of justice and piety, now faced allegations of betrayal, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. The institution's reputation, once pristine, was forever tainted by this dark chapter. In the years that followed, numerous maesters with strong ties to the Faith endeavored to manipulate historical records and subtly influence the narrative to mitigate the damage. These maesters worked tirelessly to protect the Faith, crafting accounts that downplayed the Faith's involvement and shifted blame onto lesser-known factions or isolated zealots. Yet, despite their efforts, the stain remained. Generations continued to view the Faith with mistrust, and whispers of its dark deeds persisted, undermining its once unquestioned authority. The assassination of King Aenys I and his sons stands as a lasting blemish on the Faith's legacy. Even Mazer's revenge against Faith was considered rightful justice by many. Excerpts from Sons of Aegon by scholar Felix from Dorn. Chapter 111, Chapter 96. Dark clouds hung low over King's Landing as, in a fury born of grief and vengeance for the loss of his brother, King Aenys, and his nephews, Princes Aegon and Viserys, Mazer Targaryen unleashed a display of ruthlessness that would echo through Westerosi history. Maegor was angry. He quickly rushed out, ordering his men. Go and round up the men, meet me at September of Remembrance in Sevens Hill. Maegor's loyal followers Ser Bram of Blackhull, Ser Rayford Rosby, Ser Guy Lothston, and Lord Lucifer Massey nodded and rushed to gather the army. While Visenya and Alyssa Valerian was about to calm him down, Merlin stopped them and said, "He needs this, he is grieving and angry. Also, Faith of Seven needs to be kept in check, the assassinating a king is out of control." Visenya agreed, but she didn't want Maegor to lose his calm. Maegor Targaryen, clad in black armor, mounted his colossal dragon, Balerion. His face was grim, his eyes cold, reflecting the depths of his grief and the fire of his vengeance. The great dragon's scales shimmered like molten night, muscles rippling as it stretched its wings wide. With a deafening roar, Balerion took to the sky, a shadow falling over the capital, as if the city itself sensed the fury that would soon rain down. Below, the faithful gathered in the grand September of Remembrance, the warriors' sons in their silvered armor, heads bowed in reverence as they offered their prayers. The light of dawn filtered through the sept's high windows, casting gentle hues over the sacred space. But their peace was short-lived. Without warning, a shadow eclipsed the sun. Heads turned, eyes widening in terror as the unmistakable silhouette of Balerion loomed above. Maegor gave no words, no declarations, his vengeance was a silent decree from the skies. He urged Balerion forward, and with an earth-shaking roar, the dragon unleashed a torrent of fire. Flames poured down like a divine scourge, scorching the sept's ancient walls, its pillars, and all who stood within. Panic surged through the faithful, cries of horror rising as men scrambled for any exit they could find. Flames licked across stone and flesh, the air thick with black smoke and the stench of burning. Warriors' sons attempted to flee, pushing and shoving against the crush of bodies, but outside the sept, Maegor's archers and spearmen waited in grim silence. Arrows flew, cutting down those who dared escape the inferno. The screams of the dying filled the city, a terrible chorus that echoed through every street and alley. Onlookers cowered in their homes, hearing the cries but too afraid to venture out. The skies themselves seemed to darken, a cloud of ash rising high above the sept, drifting over King's Landing. For 7 days, this smothering pall hung in the air, blotting out the sun and casting a shadow over the city, a constant reminder of the wrath that had razed the sacred ground. As the smoke settled over the ruins of the September of Remembrance, Maegor's guards dragged forth a lone survivor. Covered in ash, his robes singed and his skin marred with burns, Septon Minos, a man whose name was feared among the followers of the faith, was thrown to his knees before Maegor. His body shook with pain and terror as he looked up into the cold, merciless eyes of the Targaryen prince. Maegor stepped closer, his voice a low growl that echoed off the stone walls. "Tell me everything." Minos choked back a sob, shuddering as he whispered, I don't know. I was following orders. I was only his servant." Maegor's face darkened, his fury swelling. "Whose orders?" The Septon trembled, his voice barely audible. High Septon Pale, it was him. He commanded it all. Behind Maegor, Merlin's eyes narrowed as he pieced the plot together. The High Septon, he resides at the Starry September in Old Town. Maegor turned to Merlin, his voice steely with resolve. "Tell my mother to meet me there." With a silent nod, Merlin slipped into the shadows, bound for his own grim task. Maegor, wasting no time, mounted Balerion once more. The mighty dragon spread his wings, and with a single beat, lifted into the sky, tearing through the air toward Old Town. In Old Town, news of the destruction reached the High Septon's ears, and he paled, desperate for protection. He summoned Ser Morgan Hightower and 200 warrior sons, the elite force of the faith, to guard the Starry September. But even the strongest fortress is frail in the face of dragon fire. The sky darkened as the dragons approached. Maegor astride Balerion, Visenya on Vagar. From below, the gathered warrior sons looked up, their courage fading as they glimpsed the titanic creatures soaring overhead, scales glinting ominously against the dimming sky. Some prayed, some trembled, and others turned to run, their hearts seized with terror. Visenya and Vagar struck first. In a single, sweeping arc, Vagar unleashed torrents of fire that engulfed the ground. Warriors screamed as they were swallowed by the inferno, metal melted, and flesh turned to ash. Ser Morgan Hightower, resolute to the end, stood his ground, his sword raised as if to defy the dragons. But even he fell, his form disappearing beneath the waves of flame. Maegor circled overhead, watching the remaining few scatter like ants. Balerion let loose a roar that shook the very earth before the dragon descended upon the starry September itself. In moments, flames raged through the ancient building, the grand seat of the faith crumbling beneath the onslaught. Stone cracked and shattered, statues of the Seven crumbled, and every inch of the sept was reduced to smoldering ruin. When the fire finally died, there was nothing left of the starry September but charred stone and ash. The destruction was complete. Maegor had not only avenged his family but left a mark of terror that would haunt the faith of the Seven for generations. Chapter 112, Chapter 97. Maegor's regency over Westeros began with a firm hand, as he sought to restore order and weaken the power of the faith of the Seven, whose influence had nearly cost him his family. As regent for the young Jaehaerys Targaryen, Maegor wasted no time in imposing strict laws on the faith. He reclaimed vast lands they had acquired over the years, redirecting them to the crown or other loyal houses. Additionally, he introduced taxes on the faith, a move that sent waves of protest through their ranks. Yet the faith, still reeling from the destruction of the starry September and their bruised reputation after the public hearing on Aenys' assassination, dared not push Maegor too far. Their position was tenuous, their voices muted by fear and necessity. In the capital, Merlin, ever the steadfast ally, aided Maegor in solidifying his rule. With Merlin's magic, the Red Keep, Maegor's vision of a grand and formidable castle, was completed in record time, its red stone walls rising as a symbol of Targaryen power. The castle's presence loomed over King's Landing, a physical reminder to all of Maegor's authority and Merlin's mystical influence. One evening, Merlin found himself gazing across the God's Wood, where his son and Lena Targaryen stood by the heart tree, its ancient, carved face silently watching them. The two were deep in conversation, laughter spilling between them. They were betrothed, though in no rush to marry or bear children, knowing they had the gift of time, their agelessness ensured by the mysterious power of melange. From behind him, Maegor and Visenya approached. Visenya's usually stern face softened as she watched the young couple. "They are perfect for each other," she remarked, a rare glimmer of affection in her voice. Merlin nodded, though his eyes held a hint of thoughtfulness. "How fares the council meeting?" he asked. Maegor let out an exasperated sigh. "Irritating, as ever." Visenya added with a wry smile, "The faith has stepped back, for now, and the other lords are wary. They remain loyal to Maegor, at least publicly." Merlin hummed, his gaze still fixed on the heart tree. "But the southern lords hold grudges. Maegor has made powerful enemies there." A scowl crossed Maegor's face. "If they threaten my family, I will burn them alive." Merlin placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Even with dragons, you must tread carefully. They will not strike openly, they will aim for what you hold most dear." A dark frown clouded Maegor's features, but he gave a sharp nod, acknowledging Merlin's caution. Visenya's face grew serious. "Jaehaerys, too, has been speaking with various lords, gathering allies. It's clear he views you as a usurper, Maegor." Maegor's eyes narrowed, frustration simmering. "The boy is naive," he growled. "He doesn't see what I've done for this family, what I've protected." Merlin's gaze shifted from the young couple to Maegor. "He is young, but he will come to understand, or he will not. Keep your watchful eyes open, Maegor. The seeds of discontent can flourish in unexpected places." Maegor gave a curt nod, while Merlin turned his gaze to Visenya, an inquisitive glint in his eyes. "Still taking the melange potion?" he asked with a wry smile. Visenya's stern demeanor softened as she returned the smile. "I'll keep taking it," she replied, "at least until I have a grandchild to dote on." Maegor let out a snort, though a rare smile touched his lips. The thought of family, of a legacy that might endure beyond the blood and fire he'd unleashed, seemed to warm even his steely resolve. Merlin's expression grew thoughtful. "In a few days, I'll be setting out for Et," he said, his voice calm but laced with purpose. "There are matters in the east that require my attention." Both Maegor and Visenya nodded, a mutual understanding passing between them. They knew Merlin's counsel was indispensable, yet his ventures into distant lands had a purpose they could only begin to grasp. "Safe travels, Merlin," Visenya said, her tone conveying both respect and a hint of worry. "And may you return with more of the wisdom that has guided us so far." Merlin bowed his head, taking in the solemn moment. Paul Emrys would later marry Lena Targaryen, they will only have children 30 years later. while Maegor would step down from being a regent 8 years later. During his tenure as regent of the Seven Kingdoms, Maegor Targaryen established himself as a strict but impartial ruler. His governance was characterized by the imposition of rigorous laws that ensured order and justice across the realm. Under Maegor's watch, trade flourished, and crime rates plummeted to unprecedented lows. Even the nobility, often accustomed to preferential treatment, found themselves held to the same standards as the small folk. During Maegor's regency, offenses against the small folk by nobles reached their lowest recorded levels, an achievement that endeared him to the common people despite his controversial methods. Although history would later celebrate Jaehaerys I Targaryen, the Conciliator, as one of the wisest and most beloved Targaryen monarchs after Aegon the Conqueror and Queen Visenya, his early years were marked by contentious decisions. At the age of 14, Jaehaerys began viewing Maegor not as a loyal regent but as an usurper. This perception persisted despite the efforts of his mother, Queen Alyssa Valerian, who counseled her son to trust that Maegor would relinquish the throne once Jaehaerys came of age. Ignoring her advice, the young prince began quietly gathering supporters, many of whom harbored grievances against Maegor. Among Jaehaerys' most notable and controversial allies was the Faith of the Seven. This was a shocking development, given that Maegor's regency had successfully marginalized the faith, stripping it of political power and exacting retribution for its involvement in the assassination of Aenys Targaryen and his sons. To secure the faith's support, Jaehaerys made significant concessions. He promised that the crown would always protect and defend the faith and offered a white cloak to Ser Joffrey Doggett, a former warrior's son who had survived Maegor's infamous purges. This reconciliation restored the Faith of the Seven to a position of influence, a decision later criticized as a misstep in Jaehaerys' otherwise celebrated reign. The consequences of Jaehaerys' alliance with the Faith reverberated throughout Westerosi history. His decision to reintroduce the Faith into the political sphere would eventually contribute to the destabilization of the realm during the reign of his great-great-grandson, Baelor the Blessed, known to history as Baelor the Fool. Additionally, Jaehaerys' choice of heir would spark the catastrophic Dance of the Dragons, a civil war that devastated the Targaryen dynasty and fractured the Seven Kingdoms. Another controversial decision during Jaehaerys' reign was his decree to expand the borders of the north by 25 leagues southward, beyond the boundaries previously established by Brandon Stark. Jaehaerys I Targaryen's attempt to expand the borders of the north by 25 leagues southward, beyond the boundaries established by Brandon Stark. While Jaehaerys intended this decree as a reward for the loyalty of the Night's Watch, it sparked fierce resistance from northern lords, particularly Alaric Stark, the Warden of the North. The rationale behind Jaehaerys' decree was to grant the Night's Watch additional lands and resources to sustain their critical role in defending the Wall. However, Alaric Stark and his bannermen viewed the move as a veiled attempt to undermine northern authority and impose greater influence over their territory. The North had long supported the Watch by supplying food, workers, and tax-free land for those who labored to protect the realm's northernmost frontier. Alaric argued that this arrangement had served both the North and the Night's Watch well and that the Crown's intervention was unnecessary and intrusive. The decree also alarmed the Reach and Dorne, the North's long-standing allies, who interpreted the move as a broader assertion of royal authority in regional matters. These tensions exacerbated an already delicate balance of power between the southern and northern regions of the realm. While Jaehaerys' actions unintentionally sowed distrust among the great houses, creating a rift between the North, the Reach, and Dorne that would resonate for generations. In the face of Alaric Stark's staunch opposition and growing discontent among the northern lords, Jaehaerys ultimately abandoned the decree. However, the damage to interregional relations had already been done. Although Jaehaerys' reign is remembered for its prosperity and unity, these early missteps served as a reminder that even the wisest rulers must contend with the unintended consequences of their decisions. Maegor's regency, though harsh and divisive, provided a brief era of stability and justice that some historians argue was necessary to maintain order in a kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. Excerpts from The Regency of Maegor Targaryen and the Early Reign of Jaehaerys I by scholar William from North Tower. Chapter 113, Chapter Extra. Maegor gave up his regent position after he found Alyce was pregnant. He wanted to move away from the poisonous Westeros, so he contacted sister Lena and his brother-in-law Paul to allow them to live in Karth. Paul agreed to this proposal. In Karth, Maegor and Alyce would have their son, Orien II Targaryen. Maegor, before moving, giving up the bond with Balerion, would move with his family to Karth. The move of giving up Balerion was a strategic decision, since Targaryen still needed Balerion and having him away in Essos was not good point. Even Visenya Targaryen would move. Also, Balerion was very reluctant to leave Maegor and even more reluctant to accept Jaehaerys as his rider later. Also, Jaehaerys, although reigned wisely, his mistake with North would prove very costly, as he actually ordered Alaric Stark that he double the land by extending it a further 25 leagues. Jaehaerys Targaryen made a mistake. He forgot the fact Aegon the Conqueror didn't defeat and conquer North, Dorne and Reach. They had an alliance, so he could only suggest North to provide the wall with more land. But Jaehaerys Targaryen, after gaining Balerion, had become proud and slightly arrogant, that he was ordering the Alaric Stark to give the land to Wall as the gift. Alaric Stark, along with Morin Dane and Joyce Gardner, all looked at the Targaryen king and queen with slight anger. Joyce Gardner was the queen of Reach. She was angry and questioned, "You are stepping over the line." Jaehaerys sighed and said, "We just want the wall to have additional land to support it." Morin Day gritted his teeth and cut in, "My friend Alaric has already provided the people with land, support through free food and exemption from taxes for all those who joined the wall. This is enough, and even Merlin comes every decade to check the walls." Jaehaerys wanted to push further by summoning Balerion to his side, and his wife Alysanne Targaryen summoned Silverwing. Both dragons appeared few miles behind them. It was show of power. Balerion the Black Dread, while Silverwing. Alaric, seeing this, just held his hand up, as the trident symbol tattooed on his arm lit up in blue, and then from sea few miles away bewildered beast jumped out from the sea with a roar. Joyce Gardner, she helped her hand out as the Yggdrasil tattoo in her arm lit up in golden glow, and suddenly a portal opened up and from it came Laden, a being terrifying, enormous, with 100 heads, like 100 pythons had been fused together. His serpentine body is thicker than Vhagar neck, and his bright scales shimmer like copper. Morin Dane held his arm out as tattoo of Set glowed red, and suddenly a cloud of sand swirled and from it came massive cobra-like serpent with a threatening posture. The serpent has dark, textured scales that give it an armored appearance, and its hood flares outward, showing ridges that add to its intimidating size. The head features glowing eyes and a mouth filled with sharp, menacing fangs, giving the impression of a mystical or divine creature. Another cobra spike serpent followed behind. Its scales have a pale, stony appearance, with cracks or glowing veins running along its body, suggesting it may be imbued with divine energy. The texture of the serpent's body gives it a weathered, ancient look, as expression is both regal and ferocious, with a strong jawline and sharp facial contours. Bewilderment roared at Balerion, who saw the challenge. But unlike previous experiences, he was wary and stepped back. Silverwing, seeing Laden, Kem is Black Snake and Hedge is the White One. All of them bared their fangs at Silverwing, who also stepped back. Jaehaerys and Alysanne, seeing this, gulped in fear. They stepped back. For the first time he saw why Aegon the Conqueror decided to go for alliance rather than war. Jaehaerys quickly spoke up. "Okay, we don't want war. The kingdoms are stable and a war will only ruin it." Alaric Stark, Joyce Gardner and Morin Dane snorted at this. But they agreed, but a rift was formed between the Targaryens and the alliance. Alyssa Valerion, mother of Jaehaerys, was so angry that she slapped his son for his foolishness. Maegor, who heard about this, was shocked. Visenya was angry that their work with strengthening the alliance between Targaryen and North, Reach and Dorne was all destroyed by this idiot. She was quick to return to Westeros on Vhagar and slap the boy. She would later try to mend the broken trust. Though Maegor Targaryen served only as regent, history has long debated the potential he held as a king in his own right. Known posthumously as Maegor the Impartial, his legacy is marked by both admiration and controversy. While detractors decried his methods as cruel, the prevailing opinion among chroniclers and lords of the realm acknowledged his steadfast impartiality in governance. He was a man who ruled without favor or bias, meting out justice with a cold hand that many believed was necessary during turbulent times. In contrast, the ascension of Jaehaerys Targaryen to the Iron Throne proved far more contentious. The early years of his reign were marred by what many described as recklessness and youthful arrogance. Securing the great dragon Balerion the Black Dread, Jaehaerys appeared emboldened by the power such a legendary beast conferred, often disregarding the wise counsel of his mother, Alyssa Valerion, and his formidable grandmother, Visenya Targaryen. His perceived hubris led to several missteps that cast a long shadow over his reign. Two decisions, in particular, have been scrutinized for their enduring impact on Westeros. The first was Jaehaerys' move to restore the faith of the Seven to a position of prominence and power. This decision was driven by his deep-seated paranoia regarding his uncle Maegor and his desire to consolidate a counterbalance to Maegor's lingering influence. However, this strategy ultimately proved futile, as Maegor's threat had already diminished, rendering the move unnecessary. Instead of strengthening the realm, it rekindled old hostilities between the faith and the crown, setting the stage for generations of tension and conflict. The second decision was the weakening of alliances between the North, Dorne, and the Reach. These bonds, painstakingly cultivated by Jaehaerys' predecessors to ensure stability and unity, were neglected and strained during his reign. This neglect sowed seeds of fragmentation and mistrust among the great houses, undermining the foundations of the Targaryen dynasty's power in the realm. Both decisions highlight the complexities of Jaehaerys' rule, where personal insecurities and misjudgments carried consequences far beyond his reign. In the second half of his reign, Jaehaerys Targaryen underwent a remarkable transformation. Demonstrating greater patience and humility, he began to heed the counsel of those closest to him. Notably, he mended strained relationships with his formidable grandmother, Visenya Targaryen, his uncle Maegor Targaryen, and the enigmatic Merlin Emrys, whose wisdom had often been disregarded during the king's earlier years. The reasons for this change have been the subject of much speculation among historians. However, Alyssa Valerian, Jaehaerys' mother, offered a candid explanation. She credited this shift in her son's demeanor to the humbling experiences he endured at the hands of three influential lords, Alaric Stark of the North, Joyce Gardner of the Reach, and Morin Dane of Dorne. These stern figures reportedly tempered Jaehaerys' arrogance and reminded him of the weight of kingship. Alyssa, known for her sharp wit, would even jest that the transformation might have been hastened by the firm slaps dealt by herself and Dowager Visenya. Perhaps, she once remarked, it was not just wisdom but also the sting of grandmotherly correction that awakened the king to his duties. This combination of personal reflection and external guidance marked a turning point in Jaehaerys' reign, paving the way for a more balanced and effective rule in his later years. An excerpt from The Reign of Jaehaerys Targaryen by scholar Viola Targaryen, Tower of the North. Chapter 114, Chapter 99 edited. The skies above Dragonstone were painted in shades of crimson and gold as the sun descended over the narrow sea, its rays casting an ethereal glow upon the cliffs. The rhythmic crash of waves below blended with the solemn chants of Valyrian priests, echoing through the courtyard where the marriage of Paul Emrys and Lena Targaryen unfolded. Beneath a towering arch carved with ancient Valyrian runes, Paul stood, holding Lena's hand, his expression a mixture of pride and adoration. His black hair shimmered in the fading light, a reflection of his mother's legacy. Lena, draped in a gown of flowing crimson silk embroidered with black dragons, radiated regal grace. Her piercing violet eyes softened as they met Paul's. Merlin stood apart from the crowd, a faint, fatherly smile gracing his lips as he watched his son exchange vows. The legendary mage, dressed in understated robes of midnight blue, looked every bit the proud father. Cassandra, standing beside him in a dark green gown adorned with silver accents, leaned closer. "You're leaving for ET soon, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice almost lost in the sea breeze. Merlin nodded, his gaze still on Paul. "Yes. I delayed it for this moment. A father should not be absent on his son's wedding day." Cassandra's expression softened. She touched his arm lightly, her voice tinged with warmth. "You've done well, Merlin. Paul is grown up to good men." Merlin turned to her, his piercing eyes reflecting gratitude. Without a word, he embraced her. Cassandra rested her head against his shoulder, a fleeting moment of solace. Paul approached them then, his face flushed with emotion. Merlin clasped his son's shoulder, his smile deepening. "I know you wanted to accompany me to ET, Merlin began, his voice resonant yet gentle, "but it seems you'll have your hands full for a while." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Lena. Paul chuckled nervously, his cheeks tinged red. "Next time," he promised. Lena joined her new husband, her fingers intertwining with his as she smiled up at him. Paul looked at her as if she were his entire world, and in that moment, nothing else seemed to exist. As the festivities continued under the rising moon, shadows danced at the edges of the celebration. There, beyond the reach of the firelight, another story lingered in the north. Far beyond Dragonstone, past the wall and into the unforgiving wilds, the snow-covered mountains stood in eternal defiance. Beneath their icy peaks, a figure clad in shadow moved with lethal precision. Zagreus, the unyielding shield of the north, the son of Mandos and married to daughter of Alara Stark, and the protector of the Starks, watched over the frozen expanse. His silver eyes, inherited from his divine father, glinted like blades in the moonlight. Yet it was not Zagreus but his grandson, Mnan, who carried the blood of both gods and wolves, that drew whispers across Westeros. His name was Mnan, a name unbound by the weight of Stark legacy. He had renounced the Stark name for 2 reasons, both rooted in his mother's defiance. Helena Stark, daughter of Horik Stark and granddaughter of Zagreus, but her heart led her to run away with a Dornish knight in training Griffin. Her elopement stirred outrage in her father, who saw the act as a betrayal to the honor of the North. In time, Horik's anger cooled, his love for his daughter outweighing his pride. He forgave her, yet she chose to remain in Dorne, taking her husband's name as a symbol of her new life under the southern sun. Mnan, born of this union, carried the blood of wolves in his veins. He was unlike any Stark before him. A son of rebellion, he had forsaken his family name, choosing instead to carve his path in the south, where the sands of Dorne met the wealth of noble lords. Dorne, with its blazing sun and shimmering sands, had shaped Mnan into a living tempest. He moved like a panther through the shadows, his anklets ringing faintly as he leapt from rooftop to rooftop. A master of martial arts, Mnan had forged a unique fighting style inspired by the movements of animals, graceful, unpredictable, and deadly. Mnan's rebellious spirit extended beyond combat. He had made it his mission to steal from the decadent lords of the south and redistribute their wealth to the oppressed. To the poor, he was a savior; to the nobles, a menace cloaked in mystery. His legend grew with each moonlit heist, his wolf-like agility and divine strength leaving even the most skilled knights in awe. A/N, does anyone need chapters about Mnan's adventures? This is during second half of J. Harry's Targaryens era. Maybe he could marry Sarah Targaryen or Diella Targaryen. Chapter 115, Notice. Chapter 116, Extra Mnan. The field outside Lannisport was alive with the restless glow of torches, their flickering flames casting jagged shadows on the restless crowd. The air was thick with anticipation and unease, the low murmur of voices echoing beneath the dark canopy of the night. At the forefront stood Lorien Lannister, an aging man whose thinning hair and balding crown glistened faintly under the firelight. A golden tooth gleamed every time his lips curled in disdain, and the heavy chain around his neck proclaimed his Lannister wealth as much as his name did. With narrowed eyes, Lorien turned to the gathered crowd, his voice cutting through the tense night like a blade. That rascal's looting has shamed us. Our reputation, our very legacy, is at stake. His voice rose with each word, his anger palpable. He jabbed a finger toward the crowd. Tonight, we put an end to that bastard's games. Tonight, the bell ringer falls. He snapped his gaze toward his servant, who stood nervously at his side. Where are Sir William and Sir Aaron? The servant bowed low, avoiding Lorien's sharp glare. They are here, my lord. Good, Lorien growled. His voice dropped to a low, menacing tone as he addressed the crowd again. Keep your eyes sharp. He could come from any direction. This ends tonight. If we have to kill him, so be it. Low-life scum. He spat on the ground, his fury radiating through the crowd like heat from the torches. The gathering nodded in tense agreement, gripping their weapons tighter. But then, it came. Ching 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 ching. The sound of a bells echoed through the darkness, faint at first, then growing louder, closer. The sound starts with a delicate metallic jingle, like the gentle clash of small brass bells and anklets, resonating as a series of cascading chimes, sharp yet melodious, with a hauntingly echoing tone that feels almost supernatural in the still night. The crowd froze, their faces paling in the firelight. That sound. One man muttered, his voice trembling. The bell. He's here. The others frantically turned their heads, scanning the field, their torchlight illuminating nothing but empty darkness. Then someone shouted, pointing. There. Look. In the distance, a shadow blurred through the night, a streak of motion far too fast for the eye to track. He's coming straight for us. A man hurled his torch at the figure, the flaming projectile cutting through the air. But the shadow, now visible as a lithe figure, tilted its head ever so slightly. The torch flew past harmlessly, its embers scattering into the grass. It was Mnan. The bell strapped to his body rang out rhythmically as he sprinted, his movements a seamless blend of speed and precision. He moved like a shadow given life, a blur slicing through the crowd before they could react. The only evidence of his presence was the relentless chime of his bell, a haunting melody that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. The crowd spun wildly, their torches casting frantic arcs of light, but Mnan was already among them. His speed was impossible to track, his form flickering in and out of sight like a phantom. A sudden gust of wind followed in his wake, swirling through the field with such force that it extinguished the torches one by one, plunging the crowd into an oppressive darkness. The chime grew louder, ringing from all directions, a taunting symphony that heightened their panic. Some felt the rush of air as he darted past, brushing against them like a ghostly whisper. Others swung their weapons blindly, striking only empty space. "Where is he?" one man shouted, his voice cracking with fear. Another stumbled backward, clutching at his extinguished torch. "He's here, he's everywhere." The field descended into chaos, the rhythmic chime of Mnan's bell now the only constant, an ominous cadence that heralded his unstoppable advance. The crowd erupted in chaos, spinning wildly as the sound of the bell seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Where is he?" someone shouted, panic creeping into their voice. Wind gusted through the field as Mnan darted past, extinguishing torches in his wake. The crowd was left in near darkness, disoriented and terrified. Some clutched at their cloaks as the chill of the night settled in, while others swung their weapons blindly, hitting nothing but air. Mnan moved like a wraith, unseen but felt, his bell's haunting melody a mockery to those who sought to trap him. The field, once filled with the bravado of men and the glow of fire, now lay shrouded in confusion, the bell's ring echoing ominously in the night. Lorien, his fury now mingled with dread, barked orders into the void. "Find him. Stop him." But even as his voice thundered, the bell's song continued, relentless, unstoppable. And for the crowd that had gathered to bring Mnan down, the night suddenly seemed much darker. 2 men spotted him amidst the blur, their faces set in determination as they rushed forward, torches raised, ready to strike him down. But Mnan was faster, unnaturally so. In an instant, he skidded to a halt, the dust and dirt beneath his feet spraying outward in a sharp arc. Before his attackers could react, he pivoted fluidly, ducking low and slipping between them with the precision of a dancer. Then came the surprise. With one hand, he grabbed the leg of each attacker. With an effortless display of strength, he lifted them both into the air as though they were weightless and flipped them over his shoulders. They crashed to the ground in a heap, their torches flying high into the smoky night sky. Mnan's eyes glinted as he moved again, catching both torches midair with an almost casual grace. The firelight danced across his wild expression, his grin spreading wide, a mad, almost predatory smile that sent shivers down the spines of those watching. Without hesitation, he spun the torches like weapons, their flames forming fiery arcs in the dark. The crowd hesitated, unsure whether to advance. One man, desperate and brave, lunged forward with his sword raised. Mnan, still grinning, hurled one of the torches with deadly precision. It struck the attacker square in the chest, knocking him backward with a startled cry, his sword clattering to the ground. Mnan turned back to the rest of the crowd, the remaining torch spinning in his hand like a baton of fire. The flames illuminated his features, a face of wild exhilaration, as if he were savoring the chaos he had unleashed. Around him, the gathered men faltered, panic spreading as they began to step back, their bravado crumbling under his unrelenting intensity. And then, just as suddenly as he had stopped, he moved again. The torch's flame snuffed out with a flick of his wrist, and Mnan disappeared into the night, a blur too fast for any of them to follow. Mnan darted through the crowd like a shadow given form, an unstoppable blur that no eye could follow. The air was thick with tension, broken only by the haunting chime of his anklets and the bells strapped to him. The rhythmic ching-ting-ching echoed through the night, a maddening sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "There. He's over there," someone yelled, spinning toward the direction of the chiming bells. Torches flared as the men turned to confront him, only to find empty air. Before they could react, Mnan was already gone, the sound of the bells shifting, now further away, now closer again, disorienting the entire crowd. Another man yelled, "He's here. Over here." But it was too late. A gust of wind rushed past them, and the torches in their hands flickered violently before snuffing out one by one. The darkness grew thicker with every second, broken only by the faint glow of a few remaining torches. Mnan's bells continued their relentless melody, the metallic ting-ting-ching weaving through the chaos like a ghostly song. The crowd turned frantically, their movements panicked. A man nearest to the sound swung his torch blindly, shouting, "Where is he? The wind answered with another sharp burst as Mnan sped past, his bell chimes fading momentarily before erupting again further away. "Damn him," one shouted in frustration, trying to relight his extinguished torch. But another gust of wind, faster and stronger, snuffed out even more flames, plunging them deeper into darkness. Lorien Lannister stood amidst the disoriented crowd, clutching his torch tightly as his eyes darted through the darkness. His breath was heavy, the tension palpable. From the shadows, Mnan appeared, running in a blur, his anklets and bells chiming faintly like a haunting melody. Lorien caught a fleeting glimpse of the figure before him, but it was too late. In the blink of an eye, Mnan was there, mere inches away. Lorien froze, his torchlight flickering as he stared into the cold, gray eyes of Mnan, the eyes of a Stark, piercing and unyielding. Lorien's heart pounded as he tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The torch in his hand sputtered, the flames snuffed out in an instant. Darkness enveloped him. He screamed, his voice trembling, but no one came to his aid. Around him, the crowd fumbled to reignite their torches, their panic spreading like wildfire. When light finally returned, Lorien wasted no time reigniting his own torch, holding it high to scan his surroundings. Mnan was gone, vanished like a ghost. For a brief moment, relief washed over him, until he felt the lightness around his neck. His eyes widened as he looked down, his hands flying to his throat. "My ancestral gold chain," he yelled, his voice cracking with fury and disbelief. A servant standing nearby hesitated before speaking. "Master, I warned you not to challenge Mnan. Now look, not only did he take the gold chain, but also..." The servant paused, grimacing. "Your gold tooth." Lorien froze, a sharp pain in his mouth drawing his attention. His trembling fingers touched his lips, and his heart sank as he felt the absence of his prized gold tooth. Pulling his hand away, he saw blood smeared across his fingertips. My gold tooth," he whispered in a mix of shock and rage. His face twisted in fury as his gaze darted wildly around the field, the torchlight flickering in his trembling hand. The crowd around him murmured uneasily, but Lorien's anger burned brighter than the flames. He threw his head back and bellowed into the night, his voice echoing across the dark field. Mnan. Chapter 117, Chapter 101. The mountains looked like something from a dream. The many layers of sandstone and multicolored minerals had been compressed together over millions of years, creating rock formations both bizarrely garish and breathtaking in their beauty. Beneath the desert sun they glowed in vivid stripes of red and yellow, green and blue. It was an artist's palette of color, a phantasmagoric feast for the eyes. Despite its beauty, though, this was a harsh landscape. People died here every day. The unprepared and the foolhardy expired from hunger and thirst, others fell prey to wild animals or brigands. Vultures wheeled in the sky, knowing that carrion was never far from their hooked beaks. The desert dust beneath the sparse clumps of greenery was rich with the powdered bones of the dead. For now the air was still, the desert undisturbed. A lizard basked motionless in the heat of the slowly setting sun. Then, sensing vibrations beneath its feet, it darted for cover. Next moment a blot of darkness appeared on the horizon, wreathed in a churning cloud of dust. Anyone standing where the lizard had been would have heard, faint at first, wild cries and approaching hoofbeats. They would have seen the blot of darkness emerge from the heat haze and resolve itself into two horses, which had men and women mounted on their backs. They were heading for the range of painted mountains, hoping that, under cover of the coming night, they would find safety in its deep ravines and steep valleys. Merlin squinted, his piercing gaze cutting through the shifting haze, while the desert's grit scraped against his skin. Beside him, Melisandre's crimson robes billowed like fire in the fading light, a stark contrast to the pallid earth. Her expression remained inscrutable, though her eyes gleamed with a strange, simmering intensity. Finally, they stopped at the base of a towering sandstone outcrop. Merlin dismounted, his boots crunching against the cracked earth, and tethered Sleipnir, his restless steed. The horse's dark coat glistened with sweat, steam rising faintly into the cooling night. Melisandre followed suit, her movements deliberate, her every gesture tinged with an eerie grace. Merlin stretched his hand forward, fingers curling as a sphere of flame coalesced above his palm. The fire crackled to life, casting sharp, flickering shadows across their makeshift camp. Its heat pushed back the biting chill, though the desert night closed in swiftly around them. The silence was broken only by the low, mournful howl of the wind as Merlin's gaze lingered on Melisandre. She stared back, her expression unreadable but sharp with curiosity. "What is so special about E.T.?" she asked finally, her voice soft yet cutting through the desert's hush. Merlin let the question hang in the air for a moment, his features shadowed by the flickering light. "E.T." he began, his voice weighted with the cadence of a storyteller, "is more than a land of silk and spice. I forged ties with them centuries ago. Helped an emperor secure his throne, earning their debt, and their friendship. Their wealth is boundless, their gods, ancient and strange." Melisandre's eyes flickered in the firelight, her interest piqued. Merlin leaned forward, his voice lowering to match the growing tension in the air. "Amongst the most revered gods are the Lion of Night and the Maiden Maid of Light. Legends say their union birthed the first god-emperor of Et, the god on earth." He paused, his gaze distant, as if peering into the centuries. "But it is their fall from grace that haunts them. The Amethyst Empress, descendant of God of Earth, she was the heir, righteous, beloved, was betrayed and slain by her own brother, the Bloodstone Emperor. His ascent marked the blood betrayal. He practiced torture, dark arts, and necromancy. He enslaved his own people, took a tiger woman for wife, feasted on human flesh and cast down the true gods of Et to worship a black stone that fell from the sky. Thus in its wake, the Maiden Maid of Light turned her face away from the world. The Lion of Night descended in wrath, unleashing horrors upon people of Et." Merlin's voice grew heavier, each word striking like a tolling bell. "Every 3 centuries, Et pays the price of that betrayal. Demons spill forth from the shadows, sent by the Lion of Night to remind them of their sins. They call these demons Tau Ti." Melisandre's lips pressed into a thin line. "And the time for the demons is near?" Merlin nodded gravely, the fire reflecting a flicker of worry in his eyes. 2 months, perhaps less. The new Yellow Emperor Chai Wang is young and naive, his armies unready. His father begged for aid before his death." He glanced at Melisandre, his tone sharpening. "So better be ready." Melisandre nodded with a smile. Merlin more or less knew Melisandre loved him more than just a mentor figure. He knew she even talked about this to his wife Cassandra. Before Merlin could continue, a sudden, ear-splitting scream tore through the darkness. It was a hideous sound. He spun towards the blackness beyond the flickering firelight. His eyes glowed blue for a moment, the darkness dissolved into a radiant, living tapestry. Shapes began to emerge in his vision, not of light, but of auras. The animals in a distance were faint, shimmering outlines of white energy, their forms glowing softly like gentle specters in the dark. A fox darted through the underbrush, its sleek body traced in pale luminescence, while an eagle perched high above, its wings folding in a halo of pure white. But not all auras were white. Merlin paused, his breath catching. In the distance, faint traces of red energy pulsed between the trees. The crimson glow was jagged and volatile, like veins of molten fire coursing through the air. He recognized it instantly, Tau Ti. Their essence was unmistakable, their aura radiating an ominous, predatory energy. And then all hell broke loose.